Okay, next up on the agenda is our public comment session. Just for a reminder for those in the audience, when you come up to give your public comment, if you could please state your name and address for the record. You can speak to agenda items one time at public comment as well as voting items. And can I just get a show of hands of who are going to be speaking during this first round of public comment? Okay, not too many here this evening, so we'll go with the 3 minutes tonight. Welcome. Thank you.
Frank Sahagian, 20 Chelsea Street. Since the Citizen now has a new editor, they're very late in publishing timely letters to the editor. So I wrote one a while ago, more than a week ago, and it wasn't printed. I would hope it would be printed before this meeting. So since it wasn't, I'd like to just read it. And it's to the editor. We gave it an honest and best shot. Although most of us did not agree with the antiquated law and state directive to redistrict to address racial imbalance at McKinley Elementary School, the Board of Education has taken their responsibility seriously and in accordance with the law are acting as agents of the state, as they well should. They've reviewed various scenarios created by an outside consultant, none of which understandably have strong support. Only 2 of the scenarios presented would make a meaningful dent towards resolution, but are highly problematic. One would repurpose Jennings to an early childhood center, but would most likely create a situation where the remaining 10 elementary schools would not be able to adequately support the townwide needed classroom space. But TBD, but looking at the agenda today, you could see it would not be, that is in fact the case. The other scenario created 2 satellite zones, which is inconsistent with Fairfield's desire to maintain neighborhood schools. All the other scenarios only modestly change our position from racially imbalanced to impending, while creating townwide disruption, not to mention further problems with the feeding of both middle and high schools. The Board of Education will reconvene on September 26th, that's the reason why I'm reading it now, to determine a path forward. It's highly unlikely that there will be an option that is in the best interest of serving the students of Fairfield, which means that the board should start to prepare a comprehensive package to present to the state all of our efforts and how redistricting is not a viable approach at this juncture. At the very least, ask for an extension. It may be risky and not what the state wants to hear, but we should have confidence and trust that the board will act in the best interests of our community. Thank you.
Hello, this is Jackie Bardenwerper, 35 South Benson Commons. Thank you for the board for all your work on redistricting. I remember speaking here in 2019, my oldest in kindergarten, my anxiety high as the board discussed redistricting my neighborhood. Then I remember sitting here in 2020, in 2022, and in June I left my kids to come here on the last day of school. Today that kindergartner is in 5th grade, 6 years. In the almost 6 years I've had kids in Fairfield Public Schools, there have been countless redistricting plans, discussions, meetings, emails, and worries. Parents sacrificing hours to understand and respond to plans. And for years I've listened. I've heard how moving children from Holland Hill will hurt working parents who will need childcare before school. I've spoken with McKinley parents worried their school will be sacrificed for a magnet. I've listened to concerns about long bus rides, overcrowded classrooms, and children's mental health still fragile from COVID, my own children included. It's clear that redistricting our children will negatively impact the quality of life for many. And for what benefit? Not one of the plans presented has shown a sustainable solution to racial imbalance without creating other problems, such as with capacity, which is actually a problem with every plan. In every scenario presented, at least one school lacks necessary classroom space. None of these plans work. That is why I'm asking the board to vote in October to amend its redistricting plan. It's time for Fairfield to start looking for creative solutions to further explore voluntary movement options and to learn from other districts. I've heard talk that the state of Connecticut is losing its patience with Fairfield. But as a mom, I've learned sometimes to do what's best for your kids, you need to dig deep and find that extra patience. And that is what the state must do now, because every number on every map we've seen is a child depending on us to do the right thing. Thank you.
You think I would learn by now? It's like WebEx and Zoom meeting. Perfect. Tracy Rinaldi, 18 Boroski. Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. I always like to start with quotes because it helps set the stage for what we are going through. I'm a mom of a first grader at Holland Hill, along with being a mom to a 4-year-old son that takes speech, occupational, and physical therapies at ECC. As a Holland Hill mom, I have lived in a community that together we can do so much. I'm a working mom that goes into New York City 2 to 3 times a week. And when my daughter started kindergarten, I was able to do this commute because Holland Hill offers before and after care for my daughter. As 2 working parents with family far away, alone, my husband and I would not have been able to both be working outside the home in careers we love and support our family and community without these before and after school programs that Holland Hill offers, along with the help of all the Holland Hill parents and community. I know there's so many listening today and in attendance. With the plan to redistrict, we would lose before care and my career would honestly not be sustainable. A career I've loved and worked for and taught my own children to love and strive for in their life as well. Also along the themes of together, we can do so much. We all know during COVID, being forced to be alone is what caused many developmental delays. As a mom of a son at ECC, I have not heard any input from the therapists and teachers that are at ECC. So I thought it would be a good idea to go and talk with them. 2 weeks ago, I reached out to my son's head teacher and asked what the therapists and teachers wanted to see done within their ECC campus and classroom. His teacher said unanimously they want a single site for ECC where there can be constant collaboration amongst the teachers, therapists, staff, and parents. Spreading out ECC and forcing it into separate schools is not even something that was mentioned by the people that will be most directly impacted. I also, for the future, I do believe there's enough evidence, hours of tape that you could send to the state of trying to find a solution to redistrict for Fairfield, but it just does not work at this time. I think it's really time to think outside of the box and remember, alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, sorry. All right. I'm Oksana Sergieva at 89 Ricosi. I have a 4th grader at Holland Hill, but before we moved to this neighborhood, he spent a 1.5 years at McKinley. I think all Fairfield schools are great, but the reason we moved him was just pure logistics. And that's what I want to comment about today. Holland Hill is the only elementary school in Fairfield with an 8 a.m. start time. As you just heard, for families with 2 working parents like mine, especially with only 1 car and one that works in the city, that commute is only really doable with that 8 a.m. start time, and that's a very convenient start time for us. Some people have even chosen this neighborhood for that start time. Scenario 4G, which is one of the scenarios that is discussed, it moves 131 children, a third of Holland Hill, to other schools that don't have the 8 a.m. start time, that have the 8:45 a.m. start time. Many of these children will need before care. Will that be accommodated at McKinley or Sherman? And who will pay for this care? Will it be the same parents who are already paying for after-school care? Will McKinley's already congested drop-off loop that I know all too well be able to handle more of those buses and cars? Scenario 4G also puts 5 classrooms of ECC into Holland Hill. What will their start time be? If they have an 8 a.m. start time, then parents who choose or resort to having to drive their younger kids to Holland Hill will have to figure out how to get their older kids on the bus to their neighborhood school at exactly the same time, not to mention the increased buses and traffic at Holland Hill. If the ECC has an 8:45 a.m. start time like the other ones do, that could cause a large disruption to the students already at Holland Hill and puts parents who happen to have older children at Holland Hill in a tough spot, having to go back and forth in that short time, either at school start or at dismissal time. So we at Holland Hill love our 8 a.m. start time. It's great. And so the logistics around scenario 4G, especially in regards to this earlier start time, are just not feasible. So I urge you to consider this fully and discount scenario 4G as a non-starter. Thank you.
Hi, Mary Lupo, 95 High Lawn Road. I understand that there is no easy solution to all the goals of our redistricting plan, but I'm here to comment on scenario 4G, which I feel is not the answer. Both 4F and 4G removes K-5 students from their neighborhood schools. Speaking as a Holland Hill parent, 4G displaces over 130 of our K-5 neighborhood students to make room for preschool students that will likely continue on to other district schools and have no connection to our community. Scenario 4G reduces our K-5 population by over 25%, which will greatly have an impact on our school. It reduces the pool of parent volunteers we have, which can already be a challenge. It diminishes our PTA fundraising capabilities without significantly reducing our budget obligations. With only 2 buses, Holland Hill has a large walking population. Students and parents alike often remain on the playground after school, playing with friends and creating connections. Removing these neighborhood students and replacing them with bus preschoolers will change the whole dynamic of the community-based school culture we have worked hard to develop. The renovation at Holland Hill, which we are truly grateful for, was completed only 4 short years ago, though with the global pandemic thrown in, it feels like a lifetime. Prior to the renovation, we had portable classrooms. Our music teacher had to push his piano around the school. Specialized services such as OT and PT had to be performed in hallways or closets. We finally have enough space for learning to occur as it should. There is no guarantee that removing students from Holland Hill will reduce the number of grade level sections to free up 5 classrooms. According to the classroom inventory published in tonight's agenda, adding ECC to Holland Hill doesn't leave enough classroom space for proper special education classrooms, STEAM, or our math and science teacher. Our renovation was designed with K-5 student population in mind. Adding in 5 preschool classrooms would move most of our kindergarten and first grade classrooms. Each of these classrooms were built with in-room bathrooms to fit the needs of our kindergarten students. With the ECC addition and resulting classroom shifts, many of our kindergarten and first grade students would be forced to share a hall bathroom, potentially with second and third grade students. We also have a special kindergarten playground. Will ECC be taking this over? If it needs its own playground, where will that go? Just thinking of the landscape of the outside. I know the solution to our redistricting is out there, but 4G isn't it. Thank you.
Good evening. Priyanka Mahali, 162 Sawyer Road. I'm also a practicing endocrinologist in the community, and so is my husband. We both moved from New York to Fairfield and specifically chose this area because of the early start time from Holland Hill. One of my biggest concerns with the Plan 4F is the safety. As somebody who lives very close to Black Rock Turnpike, I can tell how many construction vehicles and large vehicles move through Black Rock Turnpike all day, and there's not enough pedestrian crossings, which makes it very unsafe for our children to cross Black Rock Turnpike to get to McKinley. Because of this reason, and safety being a major concern, our children who are now able to walk to Holland Hill are now forced to either be bused to McKinley or the parents are forced to drop off the kids at McKinley, which again leads to 2 problems. As one of the other parents mentioned, the drop-off loop at McKinley is not enough to accommodate large traffic. This leads to a lot of inconveniences for people living in the neighborhood, as well as parents trying to get to work in the morning. The other problem with this is because our kids are not getting enough physical activity because of this whole move. This, I believe, is detrimental to our kids, both physical as well as mental health. Because of these reasons, I strongly oppose Plan 4G, and I request everyone to please reconsider their decision to move children from Holland Hill to McKinley. Thank you.
Hello, Mitch Crystal, 139 Oakwood Drive. So first and foremost, thank you for your time and dedication to the students and parents of Fairfield Public Schools. I appreciate the tough task you have and understand there is no solution that will make everyone happy. And as previously stated, really, I don't know if there's any solution currently on the table that solves all of our issues that we want to solve. With that being said, I'm here to voice my opposition to 4G. I'm sure by the end of this meeting, you'll probably be sick of hearing that. 4G is proposed as a traditional redistricting plan, but I believe the way it's structured goes against the principles of traditional redistricting. Yes, it uses contiguous boundaries, but really it stops there. In the 4G proposal, it would eliminate 5 classrooms at Holland Hill, moving 31 students from Holland Hill and only adding 25 back into Holland Hill. That loss of about 106 students, which amounts to 25 to 30% of the Holland Hill student population. Holland Hill has a very strong and tight-knit school community, partially based on the percentage of walkers to Holland Hill, and losing 25 to 30% of the student population would be devastating to Holland Hill school community as a whole, the students and families that would have been moved, as well as the students staying behind. The reason for such a dramatic shift is the state-mandated racial imbalance, but the desire to add additional ECC classrooms. Again, I understand the desire to accomplish both the state mandate racial balance as well as finding a solution for the increase needed ECC, but accomplishing both might be a bridge too far in the time that we have based on the state mandated timeline. I believe we need to look at additional options for ECC that have not currently been brought to the table, like developing a standalone ECC that would not sit in a current Fairfield public school. Maybe using vacant retail or office building space in town and partnering with the town to find and develop that space. This would solve the issue of moving elementary students out of their neighborhood schools to make space for ECC classrooms and would provide the stated best outcome of bringing all ECC and the resources under one roof. I also understand there are financial implications of this as well as implementation implication, hence the potential need for a longer timeline for that portion. But I believe that would provide the best outcome for our K-5 students as well as the ECC students, and don't our students deserve the best possible solution? Thank you.
Min O'Neill, 68 Rakosi. Thank you for the work that you've been doing and the time tonight to voice my opinion. I can't tell you how much back and forth I've had on what I will want to say tonight. It's a mixture of frustration and anger, but also sympathy and understanding for the position that you're in. You've heard from my school's community voice their concerns on 4G, and I agree with them all. I'm coming here tonight with a petition that is close to 300 signatures at a school where there's only about 379 students. Our voice is clear, and that is 4G cannot be part of the discussion due to all the issues that can't be laid out in racial balance percentages and utilization numbers. Out of the entire district, we have only 2 buses. The kids at Holland Hill walk to school every day. These kids also walk up and down the streets of the neighborhood for their Halloween parade and their upcoming walkathon. These neighborhoods know the kids, and they come out and cheer them on for all these events and many more. This is what a neighborhood school and traditional districting should look like. Redistricting lines should not look like kids crossing a 4-lane major road to get to school. It should not look like having kids go from a healthy walk to waiting for a bus, not only to be late to school. It should not look like parents being frazzled about having to find AM care, how to fund it, or figuring out how to get 2 or more elementary age kids to 2 different schools that have 2 different start times. If that's confusing for you, I think you would know how confusing it would be logistically to parents. Bottom line is this, these scenarios aren't working. 4G doesn't work, 4F doesn't work, or any of its predecessors. The recent inventory count on classrooms show that most, if not all, schools involved cannot physically accommodate these scenarios. The shifts in classrooms usage is inequitable throughout the district, as presented. We have schools that show that STEAM will be on a cart and schools that have empty rooms. Schools should either all be pre-K for 5 or K for 5. The difference between the age groups of 3 to 5 and 5 and up is vastly different. Kids at different schools will not be getting the same experience merely due to a need to fulfill too many agenda items under one scenario. We should be regrouping right now and focusing on the sole critical item that has a deadline mandated by the state and trying to figure out a way to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to our next agenda item, we're going to be having a specialized programming update by Mr. McCusey. And Mr. McCusey, thank you so much for the extra material and for your presentation. And just in the interest of time, we know what the programs are in terms of just from your presentation from December. So really looking for just updates, highlights, key takeaways, and where you see us going forward. So with that, we'll turn it over.
I understand.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Mancusi, Executive Director, Special Education. The slideshow you see up on the screen right now, it's an updated slideshow from December 13th, 2022. If it's okay with the chair, there was a supplemental sheet list kept at your tables tonight that I was going to use as to do our discussion. The slideshow is the same slideshow with updated numbers and some revisions in it. So going to the 11 by 17 form, it's a year-by-year comparison of our numbers from last year to this year. So let me just get my glasses on. Okay, so just point of reference, the 22-23 presentation that we did, that was done on December 8th of 2022. So those are December numbers. The numbers that we're going to be looking at tonight for 23-24 is as of tonight. Actually, it's as of 9/21, but it's in preparation for tonight's meeting. We put the date. So you can see your AM and your PM preschool student and preschool numbers in each classroom at Ward, in each classroom at Stratfield, and then you can also see what the percentage of non-disabled peers and students with disabilities is. The first number there, percentage, is the non-disabled peers. The second is the students with disabilities. So currently, last December, when we did our presentation, we had a total of 153 students enrolled in the preschool. Currently, today, we have 147. Just so you can see how the numbers are expected to grow, because we know, our numbers in the preschool, it's fluid. As kids turn 3, they increase. We ended last year, the 22-23 school year, and these numbers are not on here. We ended up with 138 students at Ward. We ended up with 80 students at Stratfield ECC for a total of 218 students at the ECC. In addition to that number, we had 44 itinerant students, so students who received social skills or OT, PT, speech, or some combination of those services as an itinerant. And we also had 34 students who were eligible for programming, but were not registered for whatever reason the parents did not register them. So those are final numbers from last year. So we expect to see them to continue to grow throughout the year. Additionally, as we go through this, you can see CLC enrollments from last December to today have increased by 13 students. It's largely due to us opening up a second CLC at Jennings this year. The same with the Early Literacy Academy. Last year when we did the presentation, there was 14 students enrolled in the Early Literacy Academy at McKinley School. Now, with our third cohort that we opened up this year, last year we only had 2 cohorts, it's up to 20. We have 4 open spots, which puts us in a good spot. So PPTs have the flexibility to recommend that intensive programming if it's appropriate for students. I'm happy to say our numbers of students who are unilaterally placed at the Southport School now have declined significantly. This program is very successful right now. Continuing on, the TLC, which is our social emotional behavioral program at Riverfield. TLC stands for Therapeutic Learning Center. Last year when we did the presentation, we had 7 students. Right now we have 8. The relaxation station, or the TRS, which is our middle school version of our social emotional behavioral program. Last year at presentation time, we had 9 students. Right now we have 7. And then looking at impact, we have impact at both our high schools, our comprehensive high schools. Guideline for a cap is set at 20. So currently, last year we had 17 at Ludlow, 18 at Ward. We have 17 at Ludlow, 16 at Ward as of today. WFC, we ended last year with an enrollment of 45 students. We had 19 students graduate. So currently today, we have 41. Enrollment at WFC is moving. And then CPP, we had 22 students last year at the time of the presentation. This year, we have 24 students. So you'll note in the presentation that I handed you, or in the slideshow, on July 14th, we found out through the state that legislation changed and was rolled back effective July 1st of this year, that students now can remain with their public schools the entire school year in which they turn 22 years old. Where previously the last day eligibility for public school services was their last day when they turned 21. So on their 22nd birthday, they aged out. So that has changed this year, and you can see that has had some impact on unanticipated tuition costs. That is my presentation, unless you want me to go into something more detail, or be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for the summary. Appreciate that. And for anyone who's watching or new, the full presentation is online, so you can look through it and get a better understanding of some of these programs if you'd like to on your own time. With that, I'm going to open it up. Mr. Peterson.
Just a quick question on what you spoke about last, the CPP. I noticed kind of inconsistency in the presentation. On slide 28, you talk about the cost avoidance for this program at approximately $53,000 per student. On slide 26, when you talk about the legislation change, you say, we have impacted 9 students originally projected to age out, and with an unanticipated tuition cost of approximately $650,000, but those numbers don't add up. If you take the 9 times the 53, it's like 477.
Yeah, CPP generally manages kids who finish up their 4 years of high school. So some of those 9 kids are not currently enrolled in the CPP, although we monitor them. You know, some of our high-cost kids who are outplaced. Does that answer your question?
You're saying it's the mix of these particular 9 kids that is the issue?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Thank you. And thank you for those numbers regarding the June for the ECC, which I expected to. So thank you for that. It's a few things. For the TLC, weren't we talking about 2 sections of that? Think to that?
We talked about splitting that program into a K2, 3, 5 model potentially.
Can I jump in? So in our charge, we did include 2 TLCs in terms of there was no identification of exactly what year all of those rooms would come online.
But we are anticipating seeing a doubling in the social emotional issues which prompted the birth of the TLC?
Yes, so we're anticipating over time, determining that time yet to be determined, having a lower elementary and an upper elementary program.
At this point, those students, again, because you're talking about either something is going to happen to cause this, or these students are simply currently being serviced either outplaced or in their neighborhood school, and perhaps this would serve them better? Or are you actually anticipating there's going to be a change?
We do think that we do deliver a better program than a lot of outplacements. Right now, we do have most of our students in the TLC or upper elementary. We have a couple of lower elementary students. What we're finding is that sometimes the mix of students there is we struggle with that age range. So during budget time, we may be talking about that.
Okay, so we're talking about 2 different things. I definitely hear your point in terms of how we best serve those students. But they're, and I don't know at what point we're going to turn to a, cost benefit analysis of this. Obviously, we prefer to keep our students home. On the other hand, if we need to separate this and that involves 2 or 3 students, that's going to have to be something we examine of whether we just focus on one of those 2 age bands and then the other age band is going to have to seek a different method of service. But 8 students warranting 2 completely separate classrooms.
I understand what you're saying now. We would anticipate that if we had an upper elementary, lower elementary, we'd have the capacity to service more than 8 students.
And these are students who are currently likely outplaced or?
Both outplaced or in district.
Okay, thank you. And I was wondering if you can remind me what the staffing is, and I apologize that I don't remember this, for the TRS.
The TRS, we have a full-time special education teacher, we have a full-time social worker, and then we have 3 support staff.
That's in total?
Yes.
Okay, that's not per school?
No, there's only 1 TRS. It's at Tomlinson at the district program.
Right, my apologies, thank you. And then finally, I was wondering, at what point have we done any kind of deep dive on the effectiveness of impact as opposed to using that staffing and rooting it in the house system, which is supposed to be one of the things that we have defended, one of the reasons we have defended the house system for the decades that we have done so. So that's my question. And again, I think that's an important question. So if there hasn't been that analysis done or you're not prepared for that, I understand that. But this again is a strong allocation of staff where I still question if the house system could do it as well.
Yeah, we'll have to report back on that more specifically at another meeting.
Sure.
Do we have anyone from outside Fairfield yet at WFC?
Today we don't, but we're in the process. Amanda and Kirk and I spoke. We're going to be setting up another open house and inviting our colleagues from other area districts. We have in the past had students from other districts, but currently not. Today we don't. Yet.
So on Friday, there was a meeting of Southern Fairfield County Superintendents. They have been made aware of the option of sending students, and there are some that would like to have further discussion on those possibilities.
But those students who have spent time enrolled, is that reflected in our budget book? Because that's obviously on a tuition basis.
Pardon, I'm sorry, I missed your question.
As a revenue generator?
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't recall seeing that ever as a line item.
I'd have to look at the budget book to see if it's
I know preschool tuition is in there, but I can't.
I know preschool tuition is. I don't know if WFC tuition is.
Well, let's find out.
But
If I'm around, here's a 4-month head start on that question. So thank you for that. And also the other superintendents are aware that that we moved the location, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Some are interested in touring the site as well.
Okay, I have couple questions. The updated tuition numbers in tonight's presentation, are those just last year's numbers kind of rounded up? Or are those actual, we called everyone and got updated tuition numbers?
The last year's rounded up a little bit. We know what they are because we pay them. So we just rounded those up.
Okay. And then the preschool tuition amount, historically speaking, we've kind of characterized that as 1/3 are full, 1/3 are partial, 1/3 are free. Based on our revenue item in our budget book, it seems to me that 1/3 are not full paying tuition. So this might be a follow-up on top of Mrs. Maxon-Canelli's question in terms of the funding coming in. Just how many students of the ECC program are actually paying full tuition, partial, and free? I'd like to have an understanding on that.
I'll have to get that to you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's probably a follow-up item that we might bring back to the board on some of this. Mr. Testani and possibly Mr. Peterson, we offer a lot of in-house programming. I think that there's obviously an intangible benefit that we all believe is necessary. We want to keep as many kids as we can and home in district, close to their peers and engaging with as much as they possibly can integrated into their neighborhood schools. With that said, I appreciate you giving us the offsets and the cost avoidance, and we've explained some of this to the other town bodies. However, what we don't have is a run cost. So I don't know if this is something that Mr. Testani or the Finance Committee could possibly work on before December and finding out, well, if 254 of all these programs were outplaced, what would that be? And what is the cost to run them, right? We assume that there's a substantial savings to keeping kids home and building this programming in. But I think it's necessary that we do the fiscal analysis on well, and it's not of not doing them or defending them. It's that I just think that we as a board need to be able to better understand not the cost benefit, but just the analysis of that so that when we are in front of other town bodies, we can clearly state, look, this is what it would be if we didn't have this in-house programming, and to have an understanding of the value that this is bringing not only to our students, but also to the community as a whole in terms of being fiscally responsible as well, because it is taking up a lot of rooms. So we do need to understand the benefit of that fiscally. Is that fair? And I don't know if Mr. Peterson or Mr. Astani has any feedback on that idea, but I would hope that by the end of November, early December, we could have something, just because I feel like we don't want to be looking at that while we have the budget book in front of us. We have 3 nights to go through that. So I would hope that we could get some sort of an analysis before maybe early December or something, gives a couple months in order to do that.
So I will give some initial feedback to that, just to any town body member that would like to have the discussion. We've heard for, I don't know how many months now, parent after parent tonight as well, that came up about neighborhood schools and the value of neighborhood schools. These are neighborhood children that should go to neighborhood schools, not to out-of-district placements. I've visited many of these out-of-district placements over the years and sat in classrooms. And I will say we do it much better here in Fairfield than any of these out-of-district placements. So I am happy to have this discussion with anyone in any town body here in Fairfield that if we're going to send out these children for service, then we need to start sending out every child in Fairfield then and close shop.
I understand. So again, it's not about defending the program. It's about having a comprehensive fiscal analysis of the benefit that it is actually bringing to us. And it's a fair question that other town bodies, I presume, would be asking. So
I get that. I'm just saying, do we do a fiscal analysis of running AP courses at the high school? Do we do a fiscal analysis of, every program that we run? We don't. But for some reason, I think this is being unfairly put on Rob's department and the students that these folks serve. And that's, I think.
well, it's just my feedback there I would like to know in terms of the budget.
So just so I understand the ask, because I think we've done some of this work already and we can compile it all. We can give you what it costs to run each of our specialized programs, like the staffing, the consultation involved, what that cost is per student, and match that against what the average cost of an outplacement for somebody with that profile is at the different places that we might recommend them through the PPT process, minus that number off, and you get a savings. It's going to be significant, I think.
Sorry, Mr. Peterson.
That's our charge. We will do it.
No, I just wanted to say I'm happy to address this in Finance Committee, and maybe next week's meeting we can talk about in very broad strokes. I know I'm not eager to put a great weight on the department as they're trying to come up with next year's budget, but I actually think having some even rough number of this will serve us well in dealing with the town during budget season, in the sense that we do get these questions from various town officials. Well, why shouldn't we just outplace it? Wouldn't it be cheaper if we contracted? And the degree to which we can answer that number in some concrete way, I think will benefit us. And I hope we're open to having a discussion about how we can do this in a way that's not onerous for your staff at an otherwise difficult time.
Not a problem. Like I said, I think we can do that pretty easily. I just don't think that we can, even if it was a cost to the district, if we can put a price tag on the impact this has on children that have to be sent away from their friends and from the folks that care about them the most.
And I don't disagree with any of that at all. I want to be very clear that I think that, since I've been on this board, we have in successive budgets really prioritized bringing kids back. And I think there's been widespread support for that. And these are our children. These are our town's children. But in fairness, these are questions that we get asked from other town bodies. And even if the answer, I don't anticipate an answer that's going to cause this board to overlook all the intangibles that make it meaningful to have these kids in our classroom. But I expect, as Mr. Mancusi said, we're going to be able to show a significant savings.
No, I get it. I wasn't saying this to this board. I'm saying to anyone listening that may be on another town body that I'm more than happy to have the conversation anytime.
Amen.
Mrs. Rottelli.
Thank you. I just think it's important to remind everybody when we're discussing this that although these are rooms and spaces and things, we are obligated to provide these children with what they need to succeed in our public schools. So as we go to other town bodies to discuss that, this is basic needs of children that we're providing.
I hear you, Mrs. Rottelli, and sometimes there is some education to be done in terms of, there used to be a thought that we didn't have to have pre-K at all. Like no one understood that was an obligation or a responsibility that we have. So I hear you on the education component to this as well. Absolutely. Mrs. Rottelli.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Stani, for your words. And Mr. Mancusi, I do think that we've done this work in the last 2 budget cycles for the Board of Finance. I would say start there and just update that. And I will just say a little defense of other town bodies I think that presentation 2 years ago was really eye-opening, and it was instrumental in the request by the Board of Finance for us to true up our number for special ed, which we did, and to Ms. Jacobson's point, I think just making sure that we have the update numbers and giving it some lead time to do that would be helpful. But I think that we, as Mr. Stanley said, we have a lot of that stuff already done.
Mr. Asa? No? Sorry, Mrs. Maxine Kennelly.
A couple of follow-up things, because, and I hear your point, Mr. Testani. The only thing I'll say is that, in fact, we don't educate all of our students in Fairfield Public Schools. There are some, and we could recreate with a lot of money any program that's outside of Fairfield, and we choose not to. So there, no matter what, I couldn't agree with you more that intangible of wanting, we've worked for years to bring these kids back. But in fact, sometimes there is an analysis which would indicate we can't do this as well. It would involve too much, whatever it is, sacrifice elsewhere or fiscal, management that we can't do. So we don't have all of our students in-house for that reason. So that's, I think, part of where I agree with Mrs. Jacobson, and I appreciate Mr. Peterson taking this up in finance. Again, we know we're going to get asked the questions, and two, it's been a while, I think, since we've really done it close up. What are the current numbers? So I do appreciate that. Switching gears to a couple of things. One, I was wondering if you could speak, Mr. Mancusi, because we have been talking very, very explicitly for a couple of years now about improving our non-disabled peers ratio. This doesn't look better to me. And I was hoping that you or someone on staff could speak to what are we doing, because whatever it is isn't working.
Okay, we're advertising on our website. We have, advertising the district newsletter. We have postings in buildings. We know that getting peers for our morning sessions is usually not difficult. Afternoons have been. We are meeting Kristen and Mr. Testani to come up with some more strategic ways where we can increase our peer ratios.
Thank you. And so that kind of leads me to the one thing that's not on here at all is that we know we've been talking for a while about moving to a full day offering, which would completely change how we're doing these sections, which obviously then impacts the space that is needed. So is that going to be part of the budget rollout, or is that information we're going to get ahead of time of this is what we're looking to commit to?
That's a good question. We are discussing, and we're probably going to release some information regarding the new legislation and how that will impact us for 24-25. I think right now, coming to that decision and then figuring and working backwards on offering full day for 4-year-olds is going to kind of come in tandem. So you will see that in the budget for the coming cycle.
If it were possible, because thank you, so that gives us our timeline. If it were possible, if we're going to get any kind of information in December about especially if it could be incorporated in that, because obviously otherwise we know that there's going to be a significant amount of January time allocated to this. If we know it's in the budget, it'd be great to get a peek early.
Definitely. Okay, gotcha.
Mr. Peterson.
We had this on our agenda for the September Finance Committee meeting. It was unfortunately pushed off we went into the athletic presentation for some amount of time. I was thinking to put it on next week's Finance Committee agenda again, just to begin that discussion.
Mrs. Kelly?
Hi, I was just wondering if, and pardon my ignorance, on neighboring districts or other districts around, do they have all of these programs? Do you know, do they have, the equivalent of a TLC, a TRS, an impact? Are we doing more? I'm not saying we shouldn't offer these things. I'm just wondering how we stack compared to other schools.
Generally speaking, I'll speak in generalities because I've not done like an audit of other districts, but generally districts have programs to meet the needs of their students in district. They have some level of in-district programming. I know CLC-like programming does take place in other districts. a lot of other districts, along with social, emotional, behavioral programs. High school, they have their mental health programs. Some high schools have, effective school solutions where they contract for that kind of service. ESS, who used to be here, we have our impact program, which is homegrown. Yeah, most districts do have a continuum of services and programs to meet the needs of their students with disabilities. Otherwise, they would be placing students out. And not that we don't place students out,
Right.
but, it's we need the in-district programs. And most districts do have in-district programs similar to ours.
To that, just to follow up, whenever we talk about Walter Fitzgerald, and this is not a dig on it at all. Literally the response from everyone as soon as you mention Walter Fitzgerald is it is the gem of the district, and I support that. But I think we've talked, and I've asked before about other districts having similar alternative high schools, and the answer is usually no. Yet nobody from other districts seems to be coming to us. Now I know there's maybe some interest coming, but I feel like we don't seem to have people flocking in to Fairfield to attend this. So I guess my question would be, are those students from other districts just choosing to be outplaced? Also, like, I don't know how other districts are handling this, whereas we now have an entire 5-acre facility for this population.
I cannot answer that question with authority. What I would say, if many of our students in other districts if they have similar profiles to some of our students at Walter Fitzgerald, they're likely going to be outplaced, or they're not going to attend school. I would 100% agree that Walter Fitzgerald campus is a gem in this district.
It didn't sound like to me that they were well aware of the opportunity to be able to send kids to us. That's the feedback I got. So I think that opening that door is going to be helpful.
Okay, anything else on this? All right, thank you so much, Mr. Mancusi. All right, moving on, old business, summer maintenance projects. Mr. Papa George is joining us this evening and available. Good evening, Mr. Papa George.
Good evening, thank you, and I apologize for not being in person.
Oh, that's okay. We all have the backup, we all have the information. I don't really think we need to take time to go through all this, so I would simply just open it up. The first thing I'd like to say is to Mr. Papa George and your team, wow, what a summer. Thank you for all of the work and projects that you were able to accomplish at all of our schools over the summertime. So first, just wanted to say thank you and accolades for how much work you actually were able to get done this summer. And with that, I will open it up to board members for any questions on any of these projects that were done over the summer. Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
Thank you. I'll try to move quickly. On line 4, I was just wondering for the Ludlow High School scoreboard, which does look amazing. I was wondering where the grant money was captured.
I'm sorry, the grant money was captured?
Reflected?
I don't believe it actually made it onto this sheet, but we do have the reimbursement. I know Ms. Laborious was working with the town to figure out the best way to get it put into the account system.
Okay. The second question was regarding line 40 on the Holland Hill resurface playing field. Just have to follow up with my mild objection to our taking on in our Board of Ed budget. Again, I completely understand that the field was in dire need. But doing it under our budget as opposed to Parks and Rec wanted to make sure that you're aware that that's still on our radar as something that hopefully is not precedent.
Absolutely.
Next question, sorry.
Just to piggyback to that, I just want to share that I do not share Mrs. Maxon's Kennelly concern, and I just don't want it to be known that the full board has that feeling with regard to this. It is considerable size surplus that otherwise likely some of the money could have gone back to the town. In this sense, it did go back to the town and is benefiting our students. So that's my position.
And I understand that. I also look at a whole lot of projects on here that weren't done. Yet. May even have been, but in any case, it's done now. I understand that. I am guessing our budgeting will be tighter this year, so I highly doubt there'll be that kind of surplus. And once again, I just wouldn't want to see it being used to do the work of another body or commission. I can hold on the other questions. Thank you.
Mrs. Gerber?
Hi, thanks. I just had a question, just some clarity on the Walter Fitzgerald kitchen renovation. So the actual cost is going to be a little over 100,000, and is it still, the end date is still November?
We're working through that right now. I will have an updated time schedule once the building permits have been reviewed by town officials. I actually just got an email this evening saying Fire Marshal's office has finished that review. So it's gone through all parties except for the building department as of now. Once we get it back from the building department, we'll be able to lock in a better timeline and we'll present it to you.
But it could potentially go later than November then, I guess, it sounds like.
It could. We're still pushing for November. Our contractor is aware that we would like to have it open for when the kids return from Thanksgiving break. So they're still on board with that. It just depends on how long the review takes in additional time.
Okay, and just clarifying, so the actual cost is anticipated to be just a little over $100,000, because I know we had the 400 and then it was 296 and now it's 100.
To the best of our abilities at this point, that is where we stand for that project. We've been working with the contractors, so that is where we stand at this point.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Summer maintenance? All right, Mr. Papa George, thank you so much for this update and all of this work. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Adoption of policy 5141.213, students administering medication. Recommended motion that the Board of Education adopt policy 5141.213, students administering medication, opioid overdose prevention. Can I get a motion, please? Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Any questions? No, take it back to the public. Any public comment on this item? Back to the board. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Approval of educational specifications for North Stratfield partial roofing replacement project. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the educational specifications for North Stratfield partial roofing replacement project. Can I get a motion, please? Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Issa. Any questions on this? Okay, take it to the public. All right, back to the board. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Approval of revised educational specifications for McKinley partial roofing replacement project. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the revised educational specifications for the McKinley partial roofing replacement. The motion, Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Any questions on this one? Okay, take it back to the public. And back to the board. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving on. Capital Waterfall update and discussion. I think we are back to Mr. Papa George on this one.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know if you want me to start off or if somebody else.
I think we have it, Mr. Papa George. So what I think that I will do is just let everyone ask the questions that they might have on this. I will open it up to anyone who has questions on the waterfall. If we take it section by section, it might be easier just to keep things organized. Anyone have any questions on the district-wide projects? Yes, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
Just if you could clarify again that what does it get us to expend the $973,000 upfront regarding line 21. Again, I remember we agreed to it last time, but if you could just recapture what that does for the district by allocating this.
That's the planning phase for the rest of the phases for the air conditioning. So that gets us to design documents and prepared for bidding. That's twofold. First, it gives us a better opportunity to apply for more grants that may be coming from the state. It lines us up better for that. And secondly, it allows us to better refine our construction numbers than what we had. As you all know by now, that there was some missed areas when the original phase 1 went out. So there you'll see on the waterfall, there is an increase for that phase 1 project. This will hopefully eliminate or make those numbers very tight as opposed to the larger amount for the phase 1 air conditioning.
Thank you. Mrs. Vitale.
Just to follow up to that, do we have a detail on the missed areas?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
So there were some missed areas that caused the price increase. Do we have a detail on what those missed areas are and what the cost will be for those missed areas? If it's more than one, like is it, we skipped a hallway or just more?
So I can give you a brief overview and then we can get you the detail if you would like. The building committee has actually seen the detail now. So it wasn't, I shouldn't say a missed area. What I should refer to it as, it was an area that there's where there currently is air conditioning at the end of life in the building. And the feeling was that if we're going to put a brand new system and completely air condition the building and then have a part of it at the end of life and then starting to fail, it wouldn't truly meet the charge of the building committee, which was to add full air conditioning to the entire building. So they're looking at, and they're still going back and forth. I don't think a decision has been made as of yet as to what their option is going to be and how they're going to move forwards with this.
Mr. Papageorge, just a question. We were talking in facilities committee about the assessment. And I had some questions about what facilities condition assessment we were looking at. Now, you had mentioned one that was 5 years old, and then you had talked about one for the recommissioning. Is the recommissioning assessment the one done by DTC? The pricing was based on 2021 quarter figures?
I apologize. I just grabbed the report because I happen to have it here. It was the one done by DTC I'm looking to see if there's a date on this report, which there should be, but I do not see one off the top of my head. It was performed by DTC. Unfortunately, I don't see a date on it. I would have to get back to you with the date it was performed. I want to say it was 2018, but I can't be sure off the top of my head.
Okay, I'm going to think that it was sooner than that, just based on the report, having figures from fourth quarter 2021 in terms of the estimates that we used to build the figures that we put forth to other town bodies. Understand that, we heard a lot about just supply and issues and the demand for HVAC over the last 2 years since COVID, which is driving the prices up. But I went back and I looked at the condition assessment for Woods, and there really wasn't, they didn't have any red flags in terms of existing equipment. So I think I would just want more detail of what's happened or what's changed in the last couple of years, because this is a significant increase this project, and I'm also wondering if it's part of phase 1 or if it should be pulled out as it's separate that the board should put forth new ed specs for.
Absolutely, and I can tell you that the building committee has also been looking back and forth as to cost analysis as to whether, as you had just said, this should be a separate phase of the air conditioning projects, or if there's savings in having a single rollout for a building. So it is still in discussion with the building committee.
Mr. Reeser, is there any additional color you'd like to provide to that? I'm going to ask a clarifying question. Is that end of life areas at all 3 of the schools that are in phase 1?
No,
Which schools?
Woods is the one that.
So the entire 15 million is solely an additional to Woods?
Nope, there are some small adjustments throughout the other buildings as well for cost wise. No, Woods carries the largest portion of that.
Okay, it might be helpful for the 10th when we come back and bring this back just to get things finalized for the capital planning workshop. If we could just get a breakdown of that $15 million just by school. Sorry, Mr. Issa.
Yeah, in the building committee that this was discussed earlier on, and again, as Mr. Papa George says, they're still working through this, but some of those variations have to do with the different aspects of the project. You know, we have the vestibules and roofs and the HVAC. So I think North Stratfield, hold me to this, but I think that was like $1 million variance for a reason. It wasn't because of missed, you know, evaluation of air condition that's failing. So the 15 million was not the whole thing for Woods, but a considerable amount.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Vitale.
I know that Mr. Papa George is on the line for this, but I will leave it up to you and to discuss with Mr. Issa if we think that maybe the chair of the building committee should come before us instead, if he would be a better person to report on it, being that they're doing a lot of this work.
He has offered to do that.
Just before you go any deeper to this waterfall, just so everyone knows, we will bring this back at the October 10th meeting, just to any adjustments that need to be made based on discussions that we have this evening, and also just to firm everything up for the capital planning workshop that is scheduled for October 19th with the Board of Finance. So this will come back one more time before us. Mr. Issa, yes?
Yeah, if it's okay, if I could just ask Mr. Papa George, if you don't mind hitting mute until you're talking, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Papa George, on the Phase 1 AC project, you have the new total amount and the new total reimbursement numbers. And I just wanted to make sure that the reimbursement number that is in here that we had on the previous waterfall, the 5.3, was updated to reflect what we actually got for those three schools to the 5.9 and change. Was that updated? We received more reimbursement on this project than what we had estimated on our waterfall.
No, I apologize. That bottom line there is not calculating right. I will have to look into that and get you an updated sheet.
Okay, and then I don't want to jump ahead, but the water ward singular project, that was the $1,094,000, the RTU replacement as well. It's still showing 0 reimbursement, and we got 258, you know, or sorry, 285 and change reimbursement for that. So I would just ask for the 10th if we could just make sure the reimbursements have all been updated and reflective of any change in percentage rates or that Fairfield is going to be getting going forward on any of these projects or what the estimates are. Would that be okay, Mr. Papa George?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Okay, anything on Burr? Right. Sorry, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
Just one quick question. Regarding the Dwight project, obviously that's a number that has gone wildly up and down depending on what we're talking about doing there. So how firm is that number?
So without being in, without having documents and design phase, it's still a fluctuating number. It has reduced, as you can see, because our waterfall is pre-built now with calculations. So as it moves in years, it auto calculates it out. As you can see, usually we've asked for, in years past, we've asked for the seed money the year prior to the start of the project. For Dwight, we're asking for the seed money a year before that. So it would be 2 years before the start of the project, because there is such a large variance as to what could happen, what needs to happen up there, sewer lines. And so we felt that the 2 years to prepare and be able to come up with the bid documents and get a full scope of the project would help us narrow down that 58 million as the time got closer.
Thank you.
I'll follow up a really quick question. And Mr. Papa George, is that still rooted in a 504 building, so a 6 classroom addition there?
That number is still based on a combination of a possible new build versus a 504 addition. So it takes the average of doing either one of those projects at this point.
So brand new build and 504 is not reflected on here.
It is.
Oh, so this is reflective of a brand new building, not a renovation, and a 504.
Correct.
And our reimbursement on this number, did you use the lower new build reimbursement percentage?
We did not. We used the 26, but again, we will redefine that with our reimbursements.
Great, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Issa?
Yeah, I don't have the previous one, but Mr. Robert George, can you just confirm this appears to be moved up on the waterfall now, correct?
I apologize. I do not have the previous one in front of me either, but yes, it has been moved up significantly again on the waterfall.
I have one more.
Sorry, Mr. Issa?
Yeah, can you, Mr. Papa George, can you recall the year and approximate cost of when McKinley and Burr were built?
I believe I can help with that.
Thank you. I was just going to say Salazar.
Am I too loud?
No, Sally, we can hear you.
McKinley and Burr were done in the early 2000s. Burr came online, opened September 2004. McKinley opened the year before that. The approximate cost for each of those buildings was in the $22 to $24 million range some 20 years ago.
Okay, thank you. That just confirms this number seems more accurate than ones that we had had. So it's been 20 years, similar project that costs 20s.
And the last question I have on this also includes our portion of running sewer up Running Road and not doing a new septic.
That was included when we started doing the talks about the new building up there, yes.
Okay. All right. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Kelly.
I don't know the sequencing of when we talk about certain things, so I apologize. But I mean, before we can get comfortable with that number, like, is there any discussion on what we're going to use extra space for? Because based on that inventory chart that we got, and Dwight has the most classrooms that are being used for other things. So I can't imagine a town body being excited to make that bigger when they already have 10 classrooms currently that are being used not for K through 5.
And that's also because it hasn't been renovated, so they have very few small spaces, unlike the larger buildings that have been, so they don't have all of the smaller rooms. So White, Jennings, Sherman, and Osborne as well are 4 schools that have to use full-size classrooms to meet our ed specs because they don't have the same, shall we say, 20, 17, 16 small spaces. So that was in our previous presentation when we had the capacity study. So some of that is due, and when they do the renovation, we always add those small spaces as well. So I hear what you're saying. It would be like small spaces versus full-size classrooms. But I think the rationale from Mr. Papa George's previous discussions was that because Mill Hill didn't get the 3 classrooms that we had advocated for, that they had been looking to add some space if possible at Dwight. But I hear you. That's a conversation for sure. Mr. Issa.
I would just say to that point, yes, that this will have to be a discussion of the board, and it'll be different than past projects. So there might not be necessarily an exact precedent for this, but as we develop ed specs, it's not going to simply be a carbon copy of previous ones because that worked. This will have to be deep discussion for both Jennings and Dwight.
Okay. Holland Hill, anything? just the partial roof replacement there. Jennings, it's really the addition and renovation at Jennings that is on here. Same kind of question. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
One, same question, so therefore I won't repeat it. However, I have a very odd process question. What exactly is the role of the board in approving the waterfall schedule? And I ask that because, and I have no problem with it. I don't think there's anything sneaky going on when Mr. Papageorge says, yes, these dates have been changed, but it prompted me to pull up past waterfalls, and there is quite a bit of fluid movement, and we're not voting on that. So genuinely a technical question of what is the purpose of our approving a waterfall? Because if we actually are going to get into the prioritizing for the sake of an approval, then we should know that.
No, I can speak to that. So this is a living document, so we don't vote on it per se. We talk about it now. We'll bring it back for adjustments like we did last year. The board kind of puts its thumb of approval on this is what we're taking to either the capital planning work group, if there's going to be another meeting to give an update, which I don't know if there will be or not. We expect that there which would be, or to the capital planning workshop. So this is voting on it kind of would lock it. It's more of a living document in terms of there is fluid movement based on things that happen during the year and between years. So that's what I've been told, that it's fluid. Go ahead, Mr. Issa.
Yeah, and just to add on that, my belief is that this is not something that we necessarily need to vote on, but I do believe that other bodies over the years have expressed interest in the board taking a vote on it annually before it comes before. So they do know that the sense of the body and the sense of the board is this is what we want to put forward for our next round of bonding. So I think it's a good question because I've always wondered if this is something that we actually need to vote on. But I know we're consistently asked, did you guys vote on this? Whatever it is. So
Mrs. Vitale.
And I'll just second that. And I think in the past, we just voted on it right before we presented to the town bodies with the caveat that it could change again. But as the chair goes to present, wants to have the weight of a board vote behind the presentation that's made. But, as Mr. Papageorge does his work, the numbers could change as the projects move forward. And that's why the board gets like updates throughout the year as the projects move forward. We view it a couple times. We view it in the spring if there's any major changes.
And we actually vote on each of these as they come forward anyway via ad spec. So ultimately we end up voting on the funding for all of these regardless of voting on the overall waterfall. So previously we hadn't voted on it. If you guys wanted to be voted on October 10th, happy to do that. But it will need to be on that day because there's no meeting between then and the capital planning workshop. So consider this your unofficial first read if that's the case. If you guys want to vote on it, happy to put it on as a voting item. We just haven't done it in the past. So sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't.
Right, that was the point. Right. Some of these are indicated as approved, which implies a vote, and others of these, which I've always viewed it as kind of just the living document. It's a planning document where the numbers always get updated. Obviously, where we would want to weigh in would be on the priorities. What do we want to do when? That's an important conversation. I'm fine with not having a vote and using it as we have. But again, I'd want to be able to empower our leadership, whatever they needed before going to other town bodies. But again, it was the word approved that was giving me pause, and I just wanted to check.
Okay. Jennings, I'll just confirm that is a renovation, build. That is the number for 378, no addition, would be replacing the portable, however, that is currently used for music. Is that the small spaces and everything else, the core upgrades in terms of Jennings, but not necessarily adding quote unquote capacity to that building? That's what this number is reflective of, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, but Mrs. Jacobson, it says addition.
I know it does. I think that must be due to the portable replacement, but it's not in terms of going from a 378 to like a 504 or something like that. So if it's unclear, then Mr. Papageorge maybe wants to take off the word addition. Or go ahead, Mr. Issa.
Mr. Papageorge, can you confirm? I thought that there was a partial addition planned in this that we've talked about for years. Not a big addition like in other schools, but there was something that was an additional footprint, no?
There is, because of the portable and also with new electrical equipment to the building, that type of infrastructure, there would be need for increasing the building square footage slightly.
So therefore, it would have to be considered an addition.
Renovation addition.
And people in the public typically think we're going to go from a 378 to a 441 or whatever it may be. The addition is the additional spaces, but not gen ed classrooms. Point anyway. Mrs. Gerber.
Well, I just pulled up one of the many long-range facilities plans that I have. And for Jennings, it does say renovation and addition, design and install an addition to eliminate the portable classroom. Then all the building code, life safety code, and fire code requirements, update core facilities, expand APR cafeteria, design and install a new fire sprinkler system, HVAC, provide one music classroom. That would be, I believe that's where the portable is. One instrumental music classroom, one computer lab classroom, 0.5 LAC, MRT, IIT instructional support conference, 0.5 gifted room. So, I mean, it's dated obviously, but that gives you a sense of what you're talking about. Oh, and more here, 0.25 ELT room, ELL room, Spanish teacher office, OTPT, expand kitchen. So, I mean, they're expansions, but not expansions of the actual capacity.
Most of the
building in terms of
spaces that it doesn't have.
378 to higher.
Okay. And again, just Mr. Papa George, I would just make sure that that reimbursement number is updated to reflect whatever Fairfield's getting anticipated to receive, which is higher for renovation than a new build. Mr. Asa.
And just to confirm to Mrs. Kelly's earlier point, this is something, as this is a living document, as we get into the future months and potentially a new board, this is something that isn't set in stone because we have talked about, potential for a one-site ECC or whatever that may be. So the discussion will or could be had by this board. Is that the likely place to put it? And does it happen during that time? So I just wanted to make sure that that's on the radar, that it's something that I would want to hope that we make sure that that's part of our discussions moving forward, which will fall into this long-range plan. So while it's not happening today, 6 months from now, we may be talking about something like that, and it could affect where this falls.
All right, anyone else? Okay. McKinley? Mill Hill doesn't have anything. North Stratfield. I have a question on North Stratfield. Mr. Papa George, as we get into the capital non-recurring later on this evening, both Holland Hill roof projects and the North Stratfield increased. Holland Hill increased by about 500,000 what we had on the last waterfall, but North Stratfield more than doubled. So can you just give us an understanding of why the North Stratfield roof project went up over 100%?
This is, as you know, this is a full roof replacement, and it's the number that we were actually able to work with the architect engineer to come up and fine tune. So we're at the point where we're getting ready to go out to bid for it as soon as we get all town bodies to approve it. So that's why we were able to fine tune it and bring it right up to where the current conditions are today, cost wise.
Who helped us with the number that was on there before?
That was used off of a pass before the whole world shut down. That was a square footage number that was used in the industry for roof replacements.
Okay, so just going to be good to understand for the town bodies of why that project went up so significantly. Go ahead, Mrs. Vitale.
Just to follow, Mr. Papa George, was the previous number a partial roof replacement? Or was it also a full roof replacement? I don't recall.
I would actually have to check to see how it was listed previously. I would like to say it was a full, but I'm not 100% on the top of my head.
Okay, just double check that.
I'm pretty sure that it was a full replacement.
Mr. Morabito, you said it was a full from the beginning?
Yes, it's been scheduled for a full replacement for the in the waterfall for a few years.
I know it is now. Was it previously? Yes? Okay.
Yes, it was previously a full replacement, and as Mr. Papa George explained, the square footage costs that were used to project the waterfall number. The world's not the same anymore, so costs are substantially more. So that's why you're seeing the delta on that.
Thank you for just confirming that.
Yeah, and I understand this item is, since if you're putting AC into the building, that you want to have the roof done in conjunction with that project. So you're not putting it on an old roof. Okay. Osborne Hill? Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, so I have a question, just, again, I'm looking at this old facilities plan, so I don't know how up to date it is, but I was just kind of counting up the number of classroom spaces that were mentioned for Jennings and then also for Osborne Hill, and Osborne Hill actually has more in terms of the program capacity deficiencies. So for instance, totaling them all up, if my math is correct, Jennings had a total of 5 or equivalent classrooms, and Osborne Hill is 5.75. So just looking at the cost that we have projected for Jennings versus the cost we have projected for Osborne Hill, I'm just wondering if this Osborne Hill number, I mean, at first I was thinking it was really large, but now looking at the similarities between what, at least in this facilities plan, they're fairly similar. So I'm just wondering, is this number for Osborne Hill something that we are confident with or about?
I can say with confidence that we are not confident with that number. We are going to have to reevaluate it and look back at it to see where it actually came from and then what is needed for that building to reevaluate that number. We didn't want to just take it off because we didn't want to lose it, so we left it there as the placeholder as we continue to move. Like you've mentioned many times, the waterfall is a living document, so things are always updating and changing on that.
And I guess just to that point, I mean, looking at the dates that we have right now, and I know that they can certainly change, but I mean, Osborne Hill is slated before Jennings, at least it is in the waterfall right now. So I'm just, obviously knowing how the costs for one project will impact all the other ones. It's just something we probably, if they're going to stay in this order, you would want to get a better handle on the Osborne Hill costs.
We'll definitely be looking to get a better number on the Osborne Hill cost, because one of the reasons that it does sit before Jennings right now is because of the total cost as to where it would fit for capital funding. As that number increases, it may be viable to bring Jennings forwards, especially since Osborne is part of the phase 1 air conditioning and Jennings would not be. So to bring Jennings up and have it fully air conditioned would be a priority for our side over an Osborne addition.
Okay. In that vein, I would just ask that if we are going to potentially make some change in terms of numbers or placement, Mr. Papa George, that, we bring forward to the capital planning workshop as true and reflective of the district's planning. And of course, things change. We know that. We want to make sure that this is as up to date in terms of our thinking going forward when we get to that capital planning workshop on the 19th. Riverfield isn't, that doesn't have anything. Roger Sherman, this is really moving up that boiler to this year and continuing on with the vestibule project. So any questions on that? That was a change that was made. Mrs. Vitale.
Just looking ahead to the changes in the vestibule pricing for this year, are the vestibules that are in the out years, have they been increased based on what we're seeing pricing for right now?
Oh, you mean?
The waterfall, yeah. Because there are a number of other projects.
We can look into that. The pricing, as you know, is because we're moving along with the design phase, so that's what fine tunes and brought the pricing up on those. We don't have that level of detail for the out years, but we can look at square footage comparisons and make sure our numbers are still good.
Thank you.
Okay, Stratfield. ECC. Fairfield Woods Middle. Roger Ludlow. Tomlinson, any of the middle schools. Ludlow High School. How are those bathrooms going, Mr. Papa George?
They will be coming up on your agenda further down.
Okay. Ward, I would just ask, I'm just going to bring up that reimbursement there, Mr. Papa George, for the Fitz House.
Yes, we'll make sure it reflects the new grant amount.
Walter Fitzgerald doesn't have anything.
Wait,
I'm sorry.
I apologize, Mrs. Jacobson. I completely missed your saying Ward. I was wondering if staff has any reaction to what was presented to us in the athletic presentation regarding a second turf field at Ward to match what will be the 2 turf fields on the Ludlow campus.
We support adding turf at Ward. I think it's become a real challenge for the athletic director to schedule everything that they need to. With one turf field, they have a lot of available space, but obviously in a week like this week with all the rain, it really limits not only during the time it's actually raining, but the days that follow with not wanting to destroy the field. So I think if we can move forward and try to come up with a possibility funding source for that, we would definitely support that 110%.
And it looks like the current ones are both going to be replaced at both high schools in the same year this time, because last time we had spread them out a year apart.
They did fit into the waterfall, but we would obviously speak with the athletic directors before we took on such a project and closed both fields.
Okay. All right. So what I have is getting some more detail on the breakdown of the $15 million addition for the phase 1 ads, possibly extend an invitation to the committee if they'd like to come in and talk about that. Making sure we check all of the reimbursement percentages and amounts and the reimbursements. Getting an update possibly on the out years on the vegetables, if those numbers need to be updated. And then possibly either moving or getting an updated cost for Osborne Hill. Those are the items that I have for the 10th. And am I missing anything? Does that sound good to you, Mr. Papa George? You got that?
We will get those to you.
Yeah, that'll be on for the 10th, so no rush. And am I getting a sense from this board that you would like to vote on this waterfall? No? You're not getting that sense? Okay. All right, so we'll talk about it on the 10th, and it'll just be the consensus of the body that this is what we're bringing forward as the living document. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Papa George. Thank you, Mr. Marbito. Thank you. Update and continued discussion of facilities, redistricting scenarios, and waterfall projects. We do have an enclosure for this item tonight. Again, just one of those placeholders that I put on agenda so that we can continue to discuss our redistricting plans in combination with our waterfall projects, long-term facility planning, and just I can walk through, I'm not going to walk through this inventory. But what I am going to say is just maybe touch on the process that central office and myself took. All we did was I met with Mr. Patestan, Mr. Papa George, and Mr. Mancusi, really just looking to have an understanding of the floor plans in terms of what all of the full-size classrooms are being utilized for in each of our buildings. There are some notes on the end with some little bit of caveats to them, and then just applied forward. So there's just an apples to apples comparison didn't you go about changing things, fixing things, arguing about things. It was just really if carrying it forward so we'd have a true apples to apples comparison, applying that going forward. Did year of implementation, 24-25, and then year of peak enrollment for the 2031-32. Although Mr. Testani did have some points, and I don't know if you want to speak to that, that wouldn't necessarily be what it be going forward because the needs of the building might change as you got more students. So it could actually be slightly worse than this. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Well, first thing I'd like to say is as much as it's been painful, I know for the public, the last couple of months with scenarios and discussions and uncertainty where some of the children may end up, I think this last few months, the process itself has been extremely helpful as we now look forward and chart our path ahead, because without all this information, without all the back and forth, the discussions, a better understanding of the methodology that was implemented by SLAM and how they move kids, it may not make complete sense on the maps for some folks, but when you move the students on using the software package that they demonstrated, it makes perfect sense in trying to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, yet it, in the end, doesn't meet the needs of our district or our community. So I think it's been very helpful. One of the challenges has been that as we continue to evolve as a system, the needs of our programs continue to change. They update. How schools were built many years ago probably will not be how they're built in the future. And I think it's important to understand that we are using space, and space is really tight right now. I know that was the feeling when I began here last fall, that we had a utilization issue. We really don't have a utilization issue. We do have some overcrowding of classes in certain schools. We do have some classes enrolled in other schools. So I think that balance is going to be difficult to try to offset. And because you just can't move a certain number of kindergartners or first graders or however to try to increase the class size at school X, because you have to move based on neighborhoods, and that could impact adding sections in other grades. So I think that's been it's going to be a challenge moving forward. But as you can see, there are schools, I think one of the speakers earlier mentioned, we do have some schools that have STEAM in a classroom, a dedicated space where another school may not, and that STEAM teacher has to travel just based on the utilization of the building being at maximum capacity. I think we do have to look at some possible redistricting. I don't know what that would look like. I think that's a bigger conversation down the road to try to ease some of the enrollment at some of our schools that are busting at the seams. But that's a later discussion. I know that's going to be something that will not be based on racial imbalance, but just based on how we're going to use our facilities. There was some assumptions made based on the floor plans that something may have looked like a full-size classroom, but in reality it wasn't. So this was very helpful, I think, for all of us. I would think you would agree in getting especially for me, to get a better understanding of how we utilize our buildings and to be able to articulate to whomever asks or believes that we are underutilizing facilities, and to go to the State Department of Education and advocate on behalf of the district in really taking our time from this point on and coming up with a plan that meets the needs of the Fairfield Public Schools.
One thing, thank you, Mr. Testani. One thing I do want to point out is just, as you know, in our charge, we added 9 additional classrooms. So those are included in the scenarios and the out years, but just so when you're looking at this year's column, just know that only 2 of those are currently online, right? So the other 7/8 are not in here yet, but they are in the out years. So just understanding a little bit of the differences here, because they haven't come online yet. So that was the 5 additional ECC rooms, 1 more TLC, and 1 more CLC. What did come online this year is 1 of the CLCs and the 3rd ELA. So just so we have a real clear understanding of what's in and what's not in. If you have any questions on this, happy to entertain them.
And one other thing to add, the need for more preschool classes may or not be impacted based on how we move forward with the new kindergarten legislation start age, but it could be impactful because parents still, even if we give them the opportunity to move their child to kindergarten, they may decide to redshirt a year, which would increase our needs for early childhood classrooms. So it could be a problem. Just looking at this year's numbers of kindergartners who fell in the September 1st to December 31st birthday range, it was, I believe, 103 students fall into that. So even if 20% of those parents decided that my child's born in November or December, I'd like to hold them back a year, that could have an impact on the number of preschool classes that we are going to use and need going forward.
But all those students wouldn't necessarily be enrolled in our pre-K. They could do a private 5s somewhere.
They could.
Right.
But they could decide because some parents are worried about an additional year of tuition costs.
No, I understand. Okay. All right, anything on this? Mrs. Kelly.
This was actually less about inventory holistically and more just a question when I saw that an entire classroom was being dedicated at Holland Hill for 6th grade math. Unless I'm confused with how that program is running, it's just like a before school program, right? So I don't know why they need a whole room.
No, they're using that for the morning math / academy. So they're using it first period and then they're using it throughout the day. We just, to try to give all the uses of that room wouldn't have fit in the column, but so the first period of the day is the 5th graders that take 6th grade math, and then it's used throughout the day by other service providers. Absolutely not.
I mean, it would have been a 50-page if we had like 0.25 during this time, and yeah, we get into the small spaces. So, Mrs. Guernsey.
I'll just clarify, I'm sorry, the gifted program and the ESL teacher use it the rest of the day.
Thank you so much for this information. I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge all the effort that went into this. This was an incredibly helpful document, and thank you to Mrs. Jacobson, our chair, and Mr. Testani, and all of the staff that worked on this. Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, Mr. Issa.
Yeah, I just want to make a brief comment in that, when I came on the board years ago, this facility utilization has been something that has been, a passion and thrust of mine. And I think what's come to light here is that looking at the uses gives me a little bit different lens on how I've looked at it in the past. We've always looked at enrollment and the number of classrooms and class sections, and never taken the time as we have over the last 6 months to deeply discuss all of the other programming that takes these spaces. So I think this gives me a new appreciation for that. And I think it's very important, and it's going to play a very important role, as Mr. Testani noted, on how we do building projects in the future. And times have changed, and it's time for us to start understanding that ourselves, and then twofold, educating the town citizens and town bodies that it's not just enrollment, and when enrollment goes down doesn't mean that we have classrooms sitting empty. So thank you.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, and thank you to Mrs. Jacobson and Mr. Testani and Mr. Papa George and Mr. Mancusi and anyone else who was a part of this process. I think this is helpful putting this here. I mean, we've all anecdotally heard stories from parents who said, Dwight isn't empty. There aren't tumbleweeds going through it. They're using all the classrooms. I know I've been in some schools that have quote unquote had empty classrooms and they are clearly been in use. So having this here in black and white is really helpful. I guess one concern I have is that while I just kind of wish that we'd had this a little bit earlier, because I do think that, we would have had to have had all these meetings. We would have had these discussions. Obviously, we have the racial imbalance issue that we still need to face, but I just wonder if perhaps we could have saved ourselves some of the 6-hour meetings and public consternation if we'd had this information sooner. I know it had been discussed at one point. I remember in the facilities committee meeting, I was not there that night or that afternoon when it took place, but I did read the minutes, and there was a reference made to, the team going out to verify things and providing floor plans for SLAM. It would have been helpful perhaps and saved us all some time and anxiety if we could have had this information sooner than later. And I think my thought at least was that this was happening, based on these minutes and other discussions that had taken place. So while I'm glad that we have this now and better now than never or later, but it would have been nice to have it sooner. And then I guess the second part of my question is, well, what now? What are we going to do now?
So in order to actually do this, I understand what you're saying for SLAM to have an accurate number of the full-size classrooms, but we did need to have the scenarios and the by grade, by school enrollments in order to do a lot of this. You wouldn't have been able to fill it out. Like the general lay of the land in terms of number of classrooms and how would have been is something different. But to actually put this to paper for the scenarios, we did need the actual scenarios. So the earlier ones probably could have been done in the summer, but we just got, September 8th was 4F and 4G. So some of this, we did need to have the scenarios in order to do some of this work, but.
And there was some discrepancies that we had to go over several times from previous floor plans that were labeled by principals. So I think we have an accurate number now. But the other thing I wanted to add, when you see some of the rooms like that for special education, there are multiple teachers using those rooms. And I think, I see Mick McGarry in the back, but the one thing that I think is important is that we need to make sure that our teachers have proper workspaces. That goes to not only being able to service children, but also to recruit and retain teachers, that they have proper workspaces. They have traveling teachers is just not a good methodology to keep teachers in the district moving forward.
All right, Mrs. Vitale.
And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. In some of the schools that have been newly renovated, I'm surprised that we're using full-size classrooms for some of these specialized programmings. I would think that we did have an ed spec, and Mrs. Gerber read, our needs, that there was dedicated space for some of this stuff. So is that are the smaller spaces being used for different things as well?
You got those in your.
Yeah, and we have staff and servicing kids.
Oh, in the floor, well, this is very helpful, and I thank you for the work that you do on this. I think we all know that this could change with a couple kids for the sections and how the classrooms are being used in either direction.
I think it's safe to say mostly adding than subtracting.
Yeah, and I appreciate the work for Dwight. As a Dwight parent, it drives me crazy that, Dwight is empty, Dwight is not empty. Dwight, in terms of facilities utilization, is using the facility because it doesn't have those dedicated spaces. So you could argue that we're not using it as efficiently as we could because maybe we're using classrooms, a full-size classroom for a purpose that could be in a smaller dedicated space. But thank you for the work, and I echo Mrs. Gerber to everybody else who worked on it.
Mrs. Kelly.
Just to follow up on that, if I ever said that, it was more meant towards, I know you weren't attacking anyone, but it was more meant that it's usually a 2-section school with 18 kids per section, not 25 kids, 4 sections. That's what I mean when I talk about empty.
And can I follow up on that? No.
And I was not at all directing it towards you, and I have concerns about it being a 2-section school. Ideally, I would like it to be, a 3-section school just for the advantage that comes with that, for having the team model for teachers and for kids, just having, a larger cohort of friends to move on to middle school. So
I mean,
that's
just
a discussion for a future day, or maybe
just technically at this point, it can't have a 3-section school at this point because they don't have the small spaces. They literally have like 7 rooms to service all of that. So they just wouldn't have the support space at this point.
Which is why we're renovating.
Okay, so I agree with Mr. Asa and Mrs. Gerber's point, both of this in terms of a deeper understanding. And yes, it would have been helpful to have just a more better picture earlier on. That may have been helpful to SLAM. So we do need to get to the part of this conversation where we get to now what? So, oh, sorry. Go ahead, B. Okay. Yes. Okay. So now what is that, obviously we've had leadership meetings and spoken with the superintendent. And I will certainly turn the floor over to you, Mr. Testani, if you'd like to chime in here as well. This process has been painful and difficult and challenging for everyone. But I think that there's some silver linings in the sense that, one, there were some very large questions that we started out with in this process, like could we operate with 10 schools versus 11? Come to realize less than a year later that not only do we need 11, we're incredibly tight on space as it is right now. I think that there's been a deeper understanding of just how our schools are being used, the spaces, how education has changed. Since some of these buildings were built in the 60s and the spaces that they have to service all the needs and diverse needs and curriculum areas as well, that Fairfield Public Schools delivers to all of our kids and our students. So for now what, I think that it has become an conclusionary statement that despite a very good shot here and a lot of time and investment, that at this point, I don't think we have anything in front of us that we would be able to implement for next year, and that we need to take some time, especially with the new board, to continue to look at long-range planning for our facilities, but also for our programming. Want to get some more information on what we're going to need going forward. We have some idea on that, but as we've talked about tonight, just what the trajectory of that is going forward as well, and ensuring that we have a workspace for our teachers and for our support staff that they need in order to deliver all of our kids' needs. So I think going forward is that I personally would like to see us take up some sort of action item in October. My thought right now is a brief resolution of some sort to just say, look, this is what we did. This is, what we found, and this is what we hope to do going forward. So going forward, I would say that we would do that. I think that Mr. Testani would have to update the state, of course, Department of Education, the State Board of Education. I'm sure that we would be more than happy to go up and meet with them or talk with them at their convenience and when they would like to speak to us. I do think we need to get that master document updated from SLAM, so that might be one follow-up item that I would just add that all the various pieces get put into one document that we can utilize for that purpose and for the other town bodies. And that when the new board comes on board, that we're going to have to continue this work in terms of assessing how we can move the needle going forward and what we're going to need long term. And that's pretty much what I have to say at this point. Mr. Testimony, do you want to say anything? Or we'll invite Mrs. Guernsey and Mr. Asa as well to share with their thoughts on some of the conversations that we've had.
Sure. I think the chair has summed it up quite well. I think to echo Mr. Testani's point, I think this process was absolutely necessary. I think it was essential. We told the state that our plan was to come up with a plan to redistrict our students in order to solve racial imbalance. And I think based on all of the information that we've gathered over the last few months, collectively, to me, shows that while redistricting could get us below the 25% in some of these scenarios, for me, it doesn't move the needle significantly enough for, you kind of go for what? What is the end goal? And is the state, going to say also, okay, and I've had some opinions about the state board and their approach with us. But I don't necessarily know that they would sit there and say moving the needle 1 or 2% below 25 makes sense. So for me, when next steps would be what Mrs. Jacobson said and Mr. Testani and leadership going before the state board, providing them an update. And then ultimately, I think that the statute says we need to have a plan. We need to have a plan. And right now our plan has multiple things on it. One of them being redistricting. And for me, if we as a board are majority of us are going to say that redistricting is not the answer, then I think that needs to come off the plan. And that I think ultimately, whether the state likes it or not, we're going to have to tell them that we need time. And I think we have a lot of documentation. We have a lot of evidence. We have a lot of backup. I think they will see that the amount of work that we've put in, I hope that doesn't go on deaf ears. But I think that moving forward, the future board is going to have to decide and work with the state. And hopefully they're willing to work with us on what is something feasible that may work long term. But quite honestly and personally, I don't see that being for years.
Mrs. Guernsey.
So thank you for articulating so many of my thoughts. And while I found this to be quite a grueling process, I'm really also happy that we were able to include and bring the public along. While I'm empathetic about what this brought emotionally to our community, I think that doing it in a transparent, having it be a transparent process was really important. And, to come to this point, having heard so much from our community about how these scenarios don't work for them, and then to see on paper how they don't work for our facilities was so important, obviously, to this process.
Mr. Peterson.
Thanks for this effort. And I do want to reiterate that I think that it is really important for us to all have gone through everything that we did. I've been talking about doing this kind of work for years, and I always imagined it would be a 3 or 4 year process. And the amount of work that we've managed to cram into the past 18 months is incredible. And in the initial vision that I had in my mind, we would be talking about next steps at this point, having been through all this. It's been frustrating to be working under the state's time frame. But a point that I've made in conversations with the public is that one of the reasons that we were trying to do this in an abbreviated fashion was the expectation of action for the 24-25 school year and getting ahead of budgeting for 24-25 school year. I guess this is a question for the superintendent in the sense of, if we resolve as a body to go back to the state and ask for more time or more guidance or whatever, how are you going to plan for the 24-25 budget? I guess, is there a possibility in your mind that the state could, regardless of what we decide here at the end of October, force us to take action that would be unbudgeted if we didn't build it into the budget that you're working on now?
It's a good question. I don't know what they will do. I think, though, that in my experience and in consult with other folks around this, that I think it's better that we work in tandem with the state to try to come up with a solution, whether it be for next year or for the year after or beyond. But I think that as much as I know it was very emotional for folks, and, we're talking about lawsuits and law changes and everything else, I think the best approach for us as a district is to work in tandem and in a collaborative fashion. And I think that was the message that I shared at the last meeting from Attorney Tom Mooney, who has written the book literally on education law for the state of Connecticut. And I think that is the approach that I feel, given all this information, is the best path forward, is to just be open and honest. I think we have enough information and data to share that this is not Fairfield being resistant to wanting to do anything or defiant. It's that we are truly at a crossroads that we don't know what the next path will be that will serve the community and the children of this community and the families in the best fashion. So I think that's the way to go.
And I don't disagree with any of that. And frankly, your citation of Tom Mooney in the last meeting carried a lot of weight with me. I guess I'm a little more pessimistic about how the state is going to respond to us. So I think if we follow this approach and we do go to them, the way I might phrase it is we might need your help. Like, help us understand how you want us to get to the result that you would like us to achieve, because we've tried to work it on our own. And they've said in past meetings, like, we will work with you. I would just think that approach dealing with the state may be more fruitful. And again, my concern is they're going to say, you didn't do the work, all you did was argue and not make a choice. But if we go to them with that, a little bit of humility, and say, we are not working against what you're asking us to do, but we require further guidance on how to achieve it, it might be more fruitful.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I also think that the point needs to be made. The spirit of the law, while I understand what their assumptions are not being challenged here. I think it's been clearly articulated from the McKinley school community that they love their school. They love being at McKinley. I don't know how much clearer that can be made. So this is not us ignoring the law. It's us really trying to listen to the voices of those who are in McKinley School and want their children at McKinley School. And I think that needs to be articulated very strategically.
But just again, 100% agree. I've knocked on doors in that neighborhood for years. No one wants to move. But in the May 2022 meeting, they were very cognizant of achievement gaps in that neighborhood. So again, just thinking about how we're going to frame the issue going before them, it seemed to them at the time that was a thing of immediate urgency. And for us to just say they don't want to move may not be the best approach.
Agreed.
And Mr. Peterson, I hear you. I mean, coming to the realization that we might need longer runway on this, and what the reaction could be. So I think that we and the town, not to say get prepared for that, but to understand that a complaint could be what they decide to do.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be a doomsayer here. I'm seeing the potential ramifications and blowback. And I think you're right when you say we need to be prepared. If this is an action that we're going to take, we may have a vision of what we were able to do and what we've accomplished here and seen it as constructive and hoping for further guidance. The state may view it completely differently, and we just need to be prepared for all outcomes.
So I think that the item that we vote on in October, do not want that to be any type of lengthy thing, right? But to express in there that we understand that the work's not done and that we're going to continue to work on this, and maybe not put a date on there, but to express in that we understand that continued work is necessary. They're not just like, we're not just having closure here with everyone that sits here, but that will continue on. So that's in my thinking as I work with leadership and Mr. Testani on crafting something, if that is the will of the board this evening going forward. Yes. I saw a hand over here, I think. Mrs. Vitale.
I share a lot of Mr. Peterson's concerns as the person who sat multiple times and shared how much, what a wonderful community McKinley is, how nobody wants to move. We had the commissioner down to McKinley, and after that visit, I think that she appreciated it, but she was not saying you can stop. We reached out, board leadership reached out to Ms. Anastasio and the state board, not the state board, but the commissioner's office last spring, and asked for help. Like, we don't really feel the time is right for redistricting coming off of the pandemic. What other options could we to explore? They said to look for voluntary movement, to look at a magnet program, to to try to increase the opt-out, that make the other 10 elementary schools equally desirable to certain populations. So I would suggest, if we're not going to move forward with redistricting and there's no plan before us that I would want to move forward, that we get to work on the other aspects of our plan that have to do around school climate, have to do the work around diversity, equity, inclusion. That was a big talking point at the state board. And the concerns around the achievement gap, the chronic absenteeism. We all know that there are multiple high needs population in that school right now. And that's just for a variety of reasons. And that maybe we need to look at going to the next budget if more resources need to go there. Another social worker. I think when you look at some of the staffing models in terms of some of our smaller elementary schools that maybe don't have the same population of diverse high needs, is the model correct? And I would just request that as going into the next budget season. I will not be on the board at that time, so I'm going to put my plug in right now that make sure that we have the supports in place to address that concern that we heard directly from the commissioner back in May.
Just quickly, I believe the staffing model and the supports are in place. I think it's really now about looking at delivery of instruction, gathering data, using that data effectively. And I think, with the conversations that are being had, I think in hiring a new principal coming up, that we will be able to start moving the needle in the right direction. I think it's just really about some minor changes and not wholesale, throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
And that was not at all a criticism on the amazing work being done by the staff there. Just appreciating that they just may need more help. And I think that if looking at the data and changing approach, and I say help just in terms of it could be outlook, it could be direction. That's all. Just want to make sure that we're looking at it and make sure that they have what they need to move forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Vitale, and I'll kind of carry some of that as I work on what we're going to vote on in October. But yes, Mrs. Vitale, I see you. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for the inventory. I think it's very helpful. I echo a lot of Mr. Peterson's concerns, and just want to remind everybody that even if we don't do anything, we still need to figure out what we're doing with the ECC and where those classrooms are going to go. And how that's going to work, not moving forward with redistricting, or we still have utilization problems with schools that are overcrowded and classrooms that are crammed when others are not. I don't know how we do that moving forward, but where's the ECC going to go?
Agreed, Mrs. Vitale, that, no, I was going to go Vitale over there. We're going to make a new pasta. Yeah. Sorry. No, part of this inventory was the realization, what are we going to do for those other rooms, right? Like, what are we going to do? And I think that that's also immediate work that we need to work on. This isn't like wait till December. Whether the committees take up part of this work, whether, I think that's where we're going to have to start doing some more work, because it's, making the sausage here can take time. So, Mrs. Maxon-Canale, yes.
Just echoing Mr. Peterson's attitude towards this, only because of I don't know if this is the right word for it, and I wasn't the one who absorbed it, but the beatdown we got last year. It was found, emphatic, and unequivocal. And that's my concern, is that as reasonable a conclusion as I believe the 9 of us are drawing here, I don't know, this wasn't where I expected we'd be at this point, obviously. And so how that conversation happens with the state, how quickly do we get an answer from the state, And I'm not talking about some, informal, feeling. I'm assuming this is going to involve people going up and sitting, and this is at a public meeting that's on TV, that we're going to have information. So what do you envision is the actual, before people start disengaging, what is the actual timeline that we see happening here?
November, early December is what I am being told, that we could be called up to present what our findings are. Possibly sooner in a committee meeting, and then the full board either in a November or early December meeting.
And so what do we do in the meantime? Obviously we have to take an action. I mean, that's, the one very definite thing we have to do is take an action. I don't know if you've thought this far ahead yet. Do we start preparing for the doomsday scenario, or do we say we're going to wait and see how they react? Because I do agree part of what we should be asking for is, concrete steps of what would move forward, what would successfully move us forward, what would satisfy them.
Well, they can't tell us what to do, so to speak, according to Attorney Mooney. They're not going to say do this, because then they are owning anything that may go wrong. So I think that's why it's important that we try to ask for help in a collaboration and start engaging in some conversations with the State Department of Ed's staffing as well as our own attorney.
Thank you. And then last thing is that I was going to say what Mrs. Rotelli said regarding the ECC. And so I would hope, piggybacking on the earlier presentation, that when Mr. Mancusi is coming for us to talk about what we're looking at, the expansion in terms of, looking at full day, that he's aware. I will want to hear, and where are you talking about putting this? That has to be a part of that conversation, and it can't be, we're going to figure that out. There's been so much work done. I would be a little impatient with that. We need to know, how is that going to happen?
So, fair question. What are we doing in the impact? We're sitting around, twiddling our thumbs, waiting till November, December. So regardless of how the state reacts, and open to hearing the board's input on this, but leadership and the superintendent are all committed to, we just have work to do for our own kids, for our own buildings, for our own facilities, for our own utilization, for our own programming. So while I appreciate there may be a negative reaction, and we can certainly look to them for guidance and assistance in this process, we need to keep going with the work that we're doing in district for Fairfield kids and for our buildings. So regardless of what the state might say, yes, we need to be open to them, talk with them, meet with them, show them our report, work on this resolution, get some information that's going to be happening in finance, work on the 24 budget, what needs to go in there, work with specialized programming, and where are we going to put our ECC classrooms and our students. All of this is going to be ongoing. So while it might seem disconnected, I see them as thoroughly braided together in terms of us moving forward and bringing that to the state. Granted, they may not have a reaction, but to Mrs. Maxon and Kelly's, we have a lot of work to be doing in the interim before we go up to meet them. And I'm sure based on this meeting, Mr. Testani might be having a sooner conversation than November or December. With them and has, and I appreciate his work, and we have in terms of reaching out and doing his updates with the state too. So they're not entirely unknown of the many challenges that we have confronted in this process. And it's not just this inventory, busing, kindergarten cutoff date, growth in the programming needs. There's a lot of things for us to walk through with them. So I hope that answers your question. And Mr. Issa, I don't know if you want to talk about, at some point we do have that approved amendment. And I know that we had talked about that at some point, probably with the new board, we would probably end up doing another amendment if that's what they ask us to do. We'll probably have to do another amendment.
Yeah, just to the point, I think when that time comes, hopefully we will have some collaborative talks with the state and maybe remove some things from the current plan and possibly add new ones. But, I think it's going to have to be more substantial than just a date change.
Mrs. Vitale.
Appreciate that. Sounds like a lot of this work's going to be done post my being on this board, but magnet programming is in our current plan. We had some discussion at the board and heard from various things from the community. While not wanting it at McKinley, there was interest in various programs that may be an action step over the next month or so. Would be just a survey of the community to see what kind of specialized programming. I don't want to use magnet, whether it be, an earlier start. We talked about STEAM, we talked about arts, we talked about IB. Get a read from our community. I said it before, I think our preschool population, reaching out to them for multiple things in terms of what they're looking for in an ECC, and would they potentially, when their child starts kindergarten, would they consider a magnet program? I think a lot of the concerns that were voiced at this table about a third grader leaving their homeschool to go to a magnet program across town probably wouldn't happen. But I think there might be an appetite for, if you're just starting out, that you go to a specialized school. And moving that work forward while we're waiting to update the plan might be a good use of time, because I am not really optimistic on the state's reaction based on past conversations with them. So I think that a good faith effort, I think we need to continue to work in good faith that we are looking to address this. Voluntary action was what they told us when we asked them for help a year ago. And I think that we should put on our, heard a lot from the community about getting creative and other options. If we're going to amend it, start thinking and start getting creative, and to the public, start emailing those creative solutions to the board.
So to your point, the idea of looking at bringing some specialized programming has not been abandoned. The issue becomes at McKinley, there's no space. And that's what the issue becomes then, that we would have to remove children out of that building to create space to bring more kids in whatever it is, in any building really, unless we're looking at Dwight or Jennings, where we could create the program and hope that people want to leave their neighborhood school and go to either one of those schools that may not be air conditioned, that may not have the facilities that they currently sit in. So, but we are going to create a STEAM program somewhere. I can tell you that. I just don't know where yet. We have had some conversations with a consultant that would help with this.
And I wasn't necessarily suggesting that it be at McKinley. It would just be within the district in terms of voluntary movement. And if you move kids out of one space, then you free up space in that building potentially. And it's voluntary as opposed to, some of the plans that are before us tonight.
Mr. Issa, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. And with all due respect, I completely disagree. I think that this work needs to coincide with long-term facility planning and a new board. And while I originally wanted this plan, I wish we were somewhere where we would have been able to solve this problem before the November election. The fact is, we will have at least 4 new members on this board. And I think that changing to a specialized programming or magnet programming is a fundamental shift of this district, and it needs to have majority buy-in of the board, the new board. So I would argue that I don't believe we should be sending surveys at this point. I'm not saying that that is not an accurate and an appropriate step, just not now.
Follow-up, Mr. Issa, I was not saying this board to take action. And I was just really trying to, in essence of time, get the new board just some information. We've heard from some people that are running, that have shared interest in it. And we've surveyed the public about 3 of the redistricting plans that were before us earlier in the summer. We've had surveys to the parents in the past, and it really is just for information, not suggesting that this board take action on it. It's really just to learn more about what our community wants. That was some of the feedback that we got when we went up to the state board. Engage your community. Find out what they're interested, what they want, what would make somebody leave their home school to go to another school voluntarily. And I don't feel, aside from these people that have spent months coming and sharing their opinions through public comment, we don't have that data. You know, you can respectfully disagree, and it was really just to get a data point. So we're making decisions from information from a wide breadth of our community and giving everybody the option to have their voice heard if they can't be in this room. Thank you.
All right. So, just to recap, if there, I'll work with Mr. Testani and leadership on something for the 10th for a first read. Because I think it's important that this board takes some action in October and that we have some signal to the state that what our intentions are moving forward. So I will move on to the next item. New business, first reading of capital non-recurring and capital projects. Mr. Papa George.
Good evening again, everyone. So you did receive the backup book, which should have the capital projects and non-recurring projects that we plan to move forwards at the summit in October. I don't know how you would like to approach this, Madam Chair, if you want us to walk through them, if you want.
Now, just any key points that you would like to make, Mr. Papa George, that are not, if you have any that you really want to point out that may not be in this book, and then we can just open it up to questions since everybody got this ahead of time.
I would just reiterate what you're seeing here, and the reason you see two colors on the table of content is you're seeing approved funding in the black, and then red is the updated funding. So we have to go back before the town bodies and ask for the additional funding for many of these projects this year as the climate has changed in the workforce. The few that you don't see that on is the Holland Hill roof. North Stratfield is a new project for this year, and Roger Ledlow Middle School is a new project for this year. They were on the waterfall, but they were moved up due to concerns for the Sherman boilers and because of the AC project for the North Stratfield School. I also want to point out, as you mentioned earlier, we did go out to bid for the Ledlow High School bathrooms, and they came in quite a significant above what we had originally budgeted for, which is why you also see that on this table of content page.
And can I just clarify, Mr. Papa George, on that front page, that $25 million number there for this year, that is all pre-reimbursement.
That is pre-reimbursement, and also please keep in mind that is not the cash flow that the town asks us to work on. That is the total for the projects.
Okay. Not cash flow, and that does not include the reimbursements, just so I remember. All right, any questions on any of these items? So, oh, sorry, Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, so regarding the Ludlow bathrooms, so is there like any more specific information? I know the bid came back considerably higher, but just anything specific? Is it just the things are more expensive, or is it the bathrooms are laid out? Is it the age? Just what exactly, was there one specific factor or a number of different factors that made this price so much higher? And going back to our discussion about the waterfall, just knowing that we have bathrooms at Ward as well, and just keeping in mind that that may require some additional adjustments based on this experience.
Absolutely. So the key point here is that things just cost more these days. In addition, the age of the bathrooms, the ADA compliance requirements that we would have to bring them to, everything just costs more at this point to do anything moving forwards. We did do, as we discussed when this project first came out, we did do the first part of it, which was we went out, scoped and cameraed every water and sewer line in the building to make sure we're not putting new on top of old infrastructure that wouldn't be able to support it. So we did move through that portion of it, and that's where we came to. And we worked with the architect and design to come up with the proposal, and then we went out to bid.
Okay, thank you. And I feel like these bathrooms have been just haunting me for many years now, and I am hopeful that we can finally get things moving with them, just because they're beyond overdue.
Yes, as I mentioned, we did go out to bid, so we are ready to move as soon as funding is approved for spring. So as soon as school gets out and spring hits, we will be moving forwards with these. I can't wait to share updated photos next year with you.
Mr. Papa George, now that you're mentioning the bids, can I ask a question? When some of these items that were bid on, that we now have increased numbers, was that just because the bid didn't necessarily cover what we thought? Like, just how does that happen when someone bids on a project and all of a sudden they're just hundreds of thousands of dollars more?
I'm not sure exactly what the question.
Well, I mean, you do the RFP and it has the scope of work. They know what they're going to be doing.
Yep.
We have an approved amount of dollars in there. People come and they bid on that, knowing what the numbers are. So is it just a matter of once they get into something a little bit deeper, they realize like, oh, we can't do it for that number?
So we don't share, obviously this is public information, it's a public meeting, but we don't share our budgets with bidders because that puts them at a disadvantage. Obviously, if they did their research, they could come back and say, this is the budget number that was put on this. We put it out to bid without that information so that we can get true bids back. We would hate to have someone come back with us and say, well, this is only going to cost $100,000, but we know they put $200,000 in the budget, so we're going to bid it at $200,000. So we don't necessarily make that information readily available. But as I said, this is all the town meetings are public meetings, so they can go back and do the research.
Okay, just wondering how the difference. Gerber.
Sorry, I'm promising not to harp on this anymore. I just have one more other question. Again, just going back to the facilities plan I have that was updated in 2019. So I know it's a few years out of date, but under the renovation of the Lobo bathrooms, the initial cost in here was 1.125 million. But there is an asterisk next to it. It says, does not include hazardous material testing. Is that included in this 3 million that we have here, or is that in addition to?
It is included in that. So during, as I mentioned, during that scope work and when we did the initial investigation, we also identified any areas that may be considered hot or asbestos. So that is included in that pricing now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on Mrs. Kelly?
Just a quick question. Will we put our original numbers in for budget approval? I know we build in contingency. How much is it? 10% of the project? Maybe we need to. Maybe we consider that amount. Yeah, apparently it needs to be 75%. Yeah, I'm just wondering if I'm just something to consider, something to throw out.
The new world. Yeah, I hear you. Mrs. Maxinelli.
And just two quick questions. On page 19, regarding the district-wide air conditioning, this is kind of a follow-up to Mrs. Gerber's point. In that purpose and justification, it references Osborne Hill as not having a large project on the waterfall chart. And just a suggestion that maybe that language should be amended because Osborne Hill does have one, and in fact, it might prove to be a larger project than has been forecasted to be, just in terms of this being accurate. And I have a second question, but I think Mr. Asa has a follow-up.
Yes, Mr. Asa.
Yeah, I would say that this is kind of a repeat of what we already got phase one approved. So this is going for extra money, Mr. Papa George. Is that correct?
That is correct. We didn't want to confuse the matters and change the wording. What you're looking at is the original ask documents and backup with the additional fees identified.
Okay, I was looking at this more as a historical document and wanting it to be accurate, but fair point. My second question is, because I know it was brought up, I can't remember if this was last meeting or the one prior to that, regarding the Woods issues with its HVAC, and that I thought part of the project was to bring it in brand new, but part of the project was addressing existing HVAC. And I know I had expressed objection to that because, and again, recognizing there could be a potential inefficiency there, but allocating money to, when we could patch it and keep it going as we've done with so many of our machines, so that we could have something maybe perhaps moving more quickly on to our other phases. Is that a non-starter? Or again, I raised it, so I'm just following up on my own point.
Take it over to our liaison to the AC committee.
So I think that the building committee, as Mr. Papa George said, is still doing that evaluation. And looking at the different options and the urgency versus dire need versus can we patch. And ultimately, I think it's the building committee's purview to go before the town to ask more money. I also think that it's how we present it. So knowing that with the cash flow cap on an annual, doesn't necessarily mean that this additional work means we have to work something off. We have to have that discussion. So I think it's a little tough though, because the building committee is saying they're still looking at this, but we have these numbers in front of us. So the timing, I think, between now and our next meeting in 2 weeks will be telling, and hopefully we'll have more information from the building committee.
Right, so for me, the disadvantage, the only disadvantage of bundling these together is what are they in their parts? So Mr. Papa George, through you to Mr. Lee, I would be interested in that breakdown, because if that work is a significant amount in this, that could be potentially problematic. There's a lot we could possibly do with that money, obviously depending on the amount. So
Mr. Papa George, could you mute it, please?
And also to that point, though, I don't necessarily know if it's safe to say there's a lot we could be doing, because this is excess in what we had already planned.
So they're asking for 15 million more.
Yeah, but we had already planned a phased approach, taking into consideration what our things. So just because we don't, if we don't do this, what I'm saying is it doesn't necessarily mean that there's, let's say, 10 million of this is that, hypothetically, it doesn't mean that means that there's all of a sudden $10 million more to use right away. I think that's an important part that needs to be presented to us. So I'm agreeing with you, but I think that just how it's presented to us is very important.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask, like, for the 10th, Mr. Asa, can you plan on having the AC Building Committee come to the board? And my recollection is that building committees have come back to the board if they need additional funding before they have gone on to the other town bodies. But I agree we need to get an understanding of the breakdown of that $15 million.
It just does follow up. If it could please be communicated to them that when we're asking them here, that is the, I don't want them showing up here and they don't realize.
Well, yeah, Mr. Asa is the liaison to them, so I'm sure he can, yeah.
I understand that. I just wanted to say it. That's all.
And just to a point, Mr. Lee has actually reached out and said he's been following, and he said that he will be prepared to present this. So
awesome. Thank you. Mrs. Vitale.
I apologize that I stepped out for the beginning of this, but I share a lot of the same concerns about this 15 million. I wonder even how, in terms of right now, this project is with the building committee. The building committee reports to the Board of Selectmen, to the first selectwoman, the Board of Selectmen. They're not reporting necessarily to the Board of Ed right now. So if they want more money, if they need $15 million more, they don't necessarily need to come before us. They need to go and make the case before the Board of Selectmen and to speak to the first selectwoman and have that conversation with her, just depending on, now, it potentially, you would want Board of Ed support, and you know how it's going to play. If it gets approved, it's going to be 15, it's going to come back to us either way. So I'm not, but just in terms of procedure of how this is working and who has control right now, this project is with the building committee. But so I wonder for voting, maybe pull it out for our capital non-recurring. It's not, if we don't, just pull it out. We vote on our other projects and keep this separately. And if we have to vote and find out exactly who is going to be going for the approval. I don't want this $15 million to stand in the way of the other projects potentially moving forward.
We're going to vote on the waterfall on the 10th, we said.
Not the waterfall.
The capital non-recurring.
The capital non-reporting.
Oh.
Recurring.
As a follow-up to that, because that's also getting at a part of my question, is that when we, for example, when Riverfield was having issues with money, they updated us
Yes.
But in terms of our budgeting and the money we were asking for, I don't recall that still then being listed to us. That was with the building committee. So if that is the situation with this, then there is another project we could be asking for. Again, I know that there's been conversation with the town, I can't remember the name of the committee, in terms of what gets allocated to Board of Ed. But if that's now in a different purview, then that is an opening. We have a lot to get done. So I reiterate Mrs. Vitale's point. I think that that's valid, that this shouldn't necessarily even be before us. Once it's under the purview of the building committee, we don't vote on it as part of our capital project request. Which means that's $15 million. I can think of a few things to do with it that are needs. These are not wants, obviously, as detailed on all of those projects and the waterfall.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, Mr. Asa, like, I'm pretty sure that if the building committee is gonna go for $15 million, they're gonna count that in our column, would be my guess.
I would think so, because the school buildings.
But if we didn't vote on it and we're not approving it,
Well, yeah, you take the 15 million out, we're still at 10 million, we're still at 10 million here. So again, to my point, I don't think it's freeing up room for another project in this cycle. But I hear you. It might be something that we want to have Mr. Papa George clarify with the First Select Women's Office.
yeah, I think we need to clarify. So this is the first read of those projects. We should get some clarification on that. We're not amending the first read, so just getting to the technical point, we're not amending the first read this evening. So I think to the technical component is that when we bring it back for the vote the next time, then they would need to amend to pull it out. That's how the technical way would go. Technically speaking.
Yeah, I mean, this 15, there seems that there's a lot of questions around this.
Yeah.
For it to be a first read, and I would not want it standing in the way of moving like the roof project forward, knowing that we need approval of that sooner rather than later so we can go out to bid. But it sounds like there's going to be work with the building committee and you have time to work it out, but.
All right, I'll work with Mr. Testani and Mr. Asa and Mr. Papa George on how we want to handle this $15 million. For both documents, the waterfall and just seems logical that if it's going on our waterfall and it's going in our lane, that technically we're kind of putting our stamp of approval on that. So to me,
I just don't recall that happening. And again, it's not like it's a public meeting and we're discussing it openly. But when we've had to ask, when we asked in the past for Riverfield.
Notice how often we go back to the town for more money.
That's very true.
We can't even remember how to do that.
But the point being, it was not then factored into our budget ask. Right.
Okay. All right, first reading of policies. First reading of policy 1324, community relations school sponsored fundraising. Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, did you want to speak to this?
So regarding the policies, before you, if it's okay with you, Mrs. Jacobson, I'd like to handle them as a body. We've been working on this for a long time. And we felt it was very important that we bring all three of them forward together as a body because they do overlap. And if we'd only brought them forward one at a time, the board would logically have questions on material that didn't belong in that policy. We tried to be really careful with that. So obviously I'm happy to take questions, but looking at here, this 1324, 3280, 3280, and 3280.1. It really is helpful, I think, to read them as a body, and so that you see what we were trying to anticipate, what we were trying to, well, not streamline, but improve communication, improve consistency across our buildings. Yes, maybe to a certain degree, make buildings a little bit less autonomous, but it was with an idea not towards stopping these types of gifts or grants, but at the idea of improving the communication so that we can improve the consistency and the awareness in central office sometimes of what's going on in the schools. That's a very, very broad brush there. But again, just reiterating the importance of reading the three of them together. And I don't know if anybody has any initial questions.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, so unlike a certain number of the policies that we get that are driven by changes in state statute and things like that, this is something that the policy committee felt was important and kind of unique to Fairfield. That said, are there other districts that have similar types of policies, or have you consulted with CABE just to kind of see if they had suggestions, or is this completely homegrown based solely on what's Fairfield?
No, great question. And maybe Mrs. Guernsey or Mrs. Jacobson can help refresh me, because two of these we did a very long time ago, and then we were waiting on the grants one. None of them were really home created. All of them had model policies elsewhere that we adapted so that we felt that it was not only workable for Fairfield, but in many cases reflective of what we were already doing. There wasn't a whole lot of paving new ground, of charting the course. This was done very collaboratively with Ms. Laborious and other staff members. So, but the easy answer to the question, very little of this was just something we crafted.
Okay, and then I guess too, since especially with has there been outreach to the PTAs and PTA council regarding this?
Yeah, there was PTA representation at the vast majority of these meetings. And so I know this got filtered out, that we were responsive. We heard and responded to a tremendous amount of PTA feedback in forming this. So we're feeling fairly strong about that.
Maybe just one recommendation now that it is in fact before us and that we are potentially going to be voting on it in 2 weeks, that perhaps there could be some sort of outreach through PTA council former president who could maybe get the word out, or whoever, just to make sure that, you know, because I think sometimes when a policy is kind of in its early stages, it seems very far away. And now that it's actually going to be voted on, it probably would be helpful just to make sure that all the PTAs are aware so that it's not kind of a surprise when all of a sudden it's there in front of them as an actual policy.
Yes, and I would say that PTA council leadership was present at a lot of these meetings, gave us a lot of feedback. But of course, what's happened now is the turnover across the entire district. So there's new leadership at PTA council, and I will reach out about that. Thank you.
Mr. Issa?
And I apologize if you already said this, but how far back does this go, and what was the thrust behind this? I mean, is there one or two, or is it a variety of things, or?
Definitely one of the prompts for us examining this was recognizing the fundraising work at some of our schools was creating discrepancies in what those schools could offer their children. And we are not, for example, at the elementary school, we are not 11 private schools. We are one Fairfield Public Schools district at the elementary school level. And it was seeing very different things happening at our different schools in terms of making changes in schools, making gifts to schools, where there was no awareness in central office that these things were happening. And again, the policy was not put in place necessarily to stop, but the fact that central office didn't even know that these things were happening was one of the things that was one of the prompts for us examining these.
Also, there was, can I piggyback, Mrs. Maxon Kelly? Some of it too was that there will be some things that happened that would have ongoing costs to the district that the superintendent or the board didn't know about, and then it would end up in the district would have to end up maintaining something or replacing things. So there was some of that involved, as well as that when you do something that has an ongoing cost to the district, that's something that we need to know about because that becomes a budgetary issue as well.
So I guess my question then is why are elementary school principals allowed to make a decision on something that could cost up to $5,000, the way I'm reading this, without the district approval, when those could easily incur consistent and ongoing costs?
I can't tell you how long we wrestled with those numbers. But again, I want to make clear, that was 3 of us in the room. If that would be something, it was the will of the board to change some of these numbers, but we spent a lot of time and in consultation with PTA leadership on what could that look like from school to school. And do we really want to take that on? Because when it drops to a certain level, you could really be talking about a lot of little things.
So, I mean, I guess my concern is that to Mrs. Jacobson's point, you could accept a gift that was $2,000, but that has annual maintenance moving forward that could be large, but you could get a $5,000 gift that, so.
When you look at bullet point number 4, Mr. Asa, in consultation with the appropriate department, meet any applicable maintenance, technology, security, and/or curriculum expectations. So in other words, if someone is going to maybe making a gift, part of the eligibility to be accepted is that they would have to do the proper consultation to ensure that something like what you're mentioning is either known ahead of time, like if a bench is going to be installed or a tree is planted, something like that. So part of this process contemplates ensuring that people are aware of anything that might be ongoing like that.
So
did struggle a lot with the dollar.
So then does the central office and superintendent then have, because of the in consultation, the ability to override a principal that wants to accept something?
Yes.
Okay, I'll send you any other questions I have via email.
Thank you. And again, this is where one of the key things for this policy being successful is tapping into people's experiences at schools. Well, what about when we did this? This policy could disqualify that. That's what we spent a lot of time on, are the what if things, because we wanted this to reflect what's happening, but also to chart the course going forward. So that's where the voice of the board and listening to the public, if they should weigh in, is going to be really important for us to get this right.
And we also included an appeals process in here as well. That was important to me because we don't want this to turn into a no policy.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So is it assumed that principals, when making a decision, let's say on something that doesn't have ongoing maintenance costs, are going to be calling 10 other principals to see if they feel it's equitable?
No, I think that's where we plan. And now it's been so long since I've been looking at this, that we'd planned on meetings, I think it was like biannually, of kind of updating. And hopefully by having that conversation be expected as part of this process, it raises awareness with principals that this I think prior to policy, they simply made their decision. There was no thought of going up the chain with it. Well, now if you know you're going to be reporting on such a gift at a certain point in time, it might make you say, maybe I should run this past somebody first, or exactly like that. It's not happening within every gift sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. My concern is that it starts to dissuade principals and administrators from wanting to accept something, and then I guess then you have the appeals process. So
I couldn't agree more with Ms. Jacobson. It was a phrase where we're not trying to turn it into a no policy, but we also can't have a situation where there is tremendous discrepancies in the experiences in our schools either, and central office needs to know.
Thank you, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly. Moving on to the approval of minutes, that the Board of Education approve the following minutes: August 23rd, 2023 special meeting minutes, the September 12th, 2023 special meeting minutes, and the September 12th, 2023 regular meeting minutes. Can I get a motion, please? Mr. Peterson, seconded by Mr. Asa. Any comments on the minutes? No. All right, take it back to the board. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Superintendent's report.
So there's a couple of items that were placed, one being the failure of up at Burr that is scheduled to be replaced actually this Saturday. So I was told and confirmed that the work will be done and completed before start of school on Monday morning at a cost of approximately $64,000, because I know that was your next question. Mill Hill AC update has not been resolved at this point. They're in the process. They've identified what the issue is, I believe, and I will get back to you when that work is completed. Obviously, we do not need an AC operating right now, but that is a priority prior to.
No, but this is a new system, correct?
Correct.
So are we going back to the vendor on this one?
Past due to do that, so it's on us.
Pardon me?
It is past the going back to the vendor, and it is now on us to repair.
We don't have an estimate on this?
Not yet. It's not a major cost, but there will be some cost.
There's no warranty on the systems that they installed during the renovation?
I'm sure there's some.
No, there's, what do you mean? Most things don't come with, those don't come with warranty?
Yeah, it's outside of the.
Warranty time?
Yes. I'm just a messenger.
Anything else?
Yes, I'm just.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Just one quick question, because in terms of the AC update, because I thought we were aware that there was also an AC issue at Stratfield. Has that been resolved? I don't even remember what the nature of it was, but I know that you had to go to the building to check that out, or Mr. Papa George did.
Yeah, I think it was resolved. So we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Couple of other things. Number one, just a couple of highlights and then some updates. So just want to congratulate Ludlow students Spencer Bradley, Natalie Campare, and Campbell Treschuk. I hope I pronounced it correctly, for being named National Merit Scholarship semifinalists. These academically talented seniors will have an opportunity to compete for National Merit Scholarships. As everyone is aware, September 15th through October 15th is Hispanic Heritage Month. It's time to celebrate the rich and diverse cultures, traditions, and contributions of Hispanic communities. This month provides us with an opportunity to learn, appreciate, and honor the immense influence of Hispanic heritage on our society. And students and staff across the district are celebrating in various ways through literature, food, and also sharing traditions. Just September, if everyone's not aware, there was a nice piece also on News 12 and in the newspaper. Fairfield Public Schools, Fairfield Department of Human and Social Services, and the Fairfield PD teamed up to launch the Fairfield Youth Collaborative. The collaborative offers programs for parents to address mental health issues, including anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders, depression, suicide, and obsession with social media, which is big. There's also an upcoming parent workshop scheduled October 11th for all parents at 6:30 p.m. at Fairfield Ward High School. There is more information on our website and social media pages, but I encourage all parents to take advantage and come out on October 11th at 6:30 at Ward. Just a couple of updates. As it was reported in the last meeting and also mentioned tonight, we do have some transportation issues that we are working out. It is the beginning of the school year. We're running about 10 drivers short. We're working with First Student to address those concerns and try to address the shortage. So as parents have reported issues, we are working with First Student to address those issues. And I think we have many of them worked out. We also do have a new tracking system for parents to track where the buses are. So we encourage everyone to get the app on their phone so they can track. And I know Mr. Asa uses it and says it's working really well. So it is helpful to parents to know when the bus is coming and where they are at certain points in the morning and in the afternoon. Just a quick update. We mentioned earlier the elementary accelerated math is working well. Students going over to Holland Hill and to Fairfield Ludlow Middle for 6th grade or 5th graders. Things are going smoothly. We have worked out where once a month they are able to participate in band and orchestra and those activities. So seems to be working extremely well. But we are gathering feedback along the way and we'll continue to report out. The fourth graders that are working with their MSTs, that seems to be going very well. The help and support of Dr. Danishevsky has also been very helpful in that area. So keep reporting back if there's any issues or anything that we need to be concerned about. I'm not sure if I mentioned that 2 weeks ago, but I will reiterate if I did, forgive me. We did have all the administrators participate this summer in 2 opportunities to get restorative practice training, 3-day training provided by RIASAP. Things went really well. And through Rob's office, we are scheduling further training for support staff, and we'll carry that on down, hopefully, to our teaching staff as well. One of the feedbacks from our administrators is they wish they can get some sort of abbreviated training because we don't have 3 days to commit full days for teachers, but to get our teachers an abbreviated training. So we're working that out with Mr. Mark Donald and the folks over at RIASAP. Gave you some preschool update. Right now, we have been working with our community-based partners as well. And we are aware that parents do have to provide deposits that are non-refundable for next school year for preschool. We have collaborated as well. On Friday, we met as a group, again, the Southern Fairfield County Superintendents, to try to stay all on the same page as how we will operate next school year. Right now, the initial thoughts are that we will allow parents to write a note or write a letter, and if they would like to have their child attend kindergarten if they fall within the September 1st, this December 31st birth date. So we will get out that information to the public. So that will allow parents to continue to plan forward if they do not want to put a deposit down and they want to send their child to start kindergarten. And last but not least, a couple of things. We did begin NWEA testing last Tuesday. That runs until Monday. Math grades K through 9, ELA grades 4 through 9, and Acadians for ELA K through 3. And the reason why I mention this in collaboration, we've been talking a lot about student mental health over the last year. Many of this discussion has revolved around the COVID pandemic, and I just want to raise to parents that this is baseline testing. It's for information for our teachers, our students, our administration to help drive instruction so that we can see continued learning and growth throughout the year. With that, I do want to recommend to any parent and to the board, I recently read a great book by Jennifer Wallace called Never Enough. I highly recommend it to every parent who has children or plans on having children. And it really enlightens everyone, and it really gave a lot of information, and I think it'll be insightful as it talks about the fine line between pushing our children to reach their full potential and when the achievement culture becomes toxic for our kids. So Never Enough by Jennifer Wallace. I highly recommend it to every parent, current or planning to have a family in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly?
Just one quick follow-up for clarification. If that's the way Fairfield goes in terms of the parent writing a letter because they wish to have their 4-year-old as of September 1st enrolled, is that the plan going forward, or is that a 1-year plan?
That would be a 1-year plan until we can get more direction on how we would assess students. The state kind of dropped this on all of our laps without any clear understanding of what an assessment would be. Our feeling is that there should be something that is consistent across the state. Not sure if they'll give us guidance on that. I also don't want to do anything right now until more is given. So we're all in agreement that this would not be a good move, and it puts families at a disadvantage that are currently in the predicament now, but it gives us a year out to plan forward. So for parents that are listening that may have 3-year-olds, this may not be the case in the following year, but this will be the case for 24-25.
Mr. Testani, do you know when our students are joining us? I had hoped they'd come today, but are they going to be available, do you think, for the October 10th
They
meeting?
will be available. We reached out to the principals and they felt that the October 10th meeting was the best date for them to start.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Committee and liaison reports. Oh, sorry.
Just a quick follow-up on your transportation and your bus tracking app. I know First Student is our transportation department's working with First Student, but if people have had the app and had a situation where they've looked and their bus is parked, it could be because there is a bus driver shortage or a substitute bus. So your bus app will track your route. So if your normal bus, for example, my kid's bus was out of service for maintenance, I was unable to track it that day. So don't freak if that happens, but I know they're working on it. So it doesn't mean that that your bus has gone off the rails.
Well, thank you for that. I apologize.
All right. Committee and liaison reports. Mrs. Vertelli.
So come join us tomorrow night at Fairfield SEPTA's first meeting of the year at McKinley at 7 o'clock. I encourage everybody here to join SEPTA. We would love to have you all as members. Just come to the meetings. That's fun too. It is tomorrow night is Meet Special Education Leadership. So our director, Robert Mancusi, will be there. All of our Fairfield Public Schools special education leadership, and a special guest appearance by our superintendent, Mr. Testani. So I look forward to seeing you all there.
Committee, Mrs. Kelly.
Two quick things. First, in policy, again, a thanks to the board for permitting me that June conversation regarding student calendar. So we are planning to take that up in policy. We did cancel the October 3rd meeting due to some conflicts, but at the next meeting, we're going to begin broaching that conversation. So thank you for that again. And secondly, Parks and Rec, the turf field is now beginning to move through other town bodies in terms of getting approval so that it doesn't quite rival the Fairfield Ludlow bathrooms in terms of the longevity of the project, but it certainly has taken a while. And so that is now beginning to move.
That, when you say approval, already approved, so is there additional, is it more expensive than they had budgeted?
No, I think it had to go to ZBA. I think there was
I thought you
zoning
said
issues.
funding approval. Okay.
Correct.
Sorry, Mr. Issa.
Do you happen to know the outcome of the light situation? Were they able to get the lights they wanted, or?
And I was trying to find that out. I believe it did not end up, and I apologize, I had my open house at work at the last Parks and Rec, so I called in and the meeting lasted another 3 minutes. So I didn't get to hear much, but I don't believe it ended up being with the full lighting that one small group had wanted there, and which I'd also been in favor of, but the point is the project is now moving forward.
Anyone else? Mrs. Vitale.
Fairfield Cares is meeting again. I apologize, I forgot my notes, but they presented the survey results, and they will be start sharing those results with the community. Just to any PTAs, if you want to have the surveys presented to your PTA, just reach out to, you can reach out to me or to the coalition. They're going to be starting Mental Health Mondays, posts on their Facebook page, and they've got a couple of other events plans, but I do not have the dates with me, so check their social media.
Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, just a few things. Last week we had we presented before the Board of Finance for the quarterly update. It was last week, right? It was very straightforward. The biggest thing that we did was walk over all the budget transfers that we've done. There was a lot of focus on the $355K that we spent on security upgrades. Special Project Standing Building Committee has continued to meet, just largely about the Riverfield and Sherman roofs, which are done. And then next Finance Committee meeting is on Wednesday the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Anyone else? Okay.
Just to mention, because we did have a PTAC meeting last Thursday evening. Ellie, who has now taken over for Katie Flynn, who did a great job, We worked together to schedule just an off-site meet and greet and it was well attended. I want to say there was a little over 20 folks who showed up at the Boca Grill at Smith Richardson. So thank you for them for hosting and providing some snacks for everyone.
All right. Open board comment. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
First, a personal note, I want to thank Fairfield Public Schools for doing that blast out regarding Odyssey of the Mind. And just for anybody listening, that tomorrow night, I'm so sorry, Ms. Fratelli, that it conflicts with the SEPTA meeting, but tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, the Connecticut State Odyssey of the Mind is hosting an online orientation. The second thing is, and maybe I should have brought this up earlier, but just to the board, to the chair, I do want to remind us that as we were talking about all this redistricting, we still have scenario 6 to talk about. So I am looking forward to that being on a future agenda.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry, Ms. Teresa.
Just a quick question on the Odyssey of the Mind. Do you know if they'll be able to record that?
I actually emailed that question in, and I'm not sure of the answer yet, but I will get you that answer.
Mr. Vitale.
I learned of some sad news, and staff may know about it, that Dr. Dawn Zara, who was a special ed teacher at Ward, passed from cancer. And I just want to extend the board's condolences to her family and to any staff members who were friends with her. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Vitale. Public comment.
Hi there, Katie Flynn, 204 Grandview Road, and I'm going to try and speak to 2 agenda items very quickly. As the outgoing PTA Council President, I just want to speak to the first read of the policies regarding fundraising. I had my first meeting regarding that with Mr. Cummings, Mr. Papa George, I think when I was president-elect. With Steve Baker, talking about benches being installed, trees being installed. So I just want to reiterate that the beginning of that process was very organic. And in attending, I think, 6 committee meetings, going back to PTA Council quite often for feedback, informing them of the process. I just want to speak to how mindful it was of our community, how mindful it was of not just our PTAs, but our other foundations, both athletic, music, arts. The list really could go on and on about how generous our community is to our schools and how that policy was meant to be accommodating of that and really give some aligned practice to not only the policy of the Fairfield Public Schools, but also PTA's policies and other organizations. When we talk about meetings with principals, those are things that are expectations of the National PTA. So to see those incorporated into our policies, I think is a great move forward. And then just secondarily, and I'm going to go as quickly as I can while being understandable, I just want to say a quick thank you to you all for your work on redistricting. I know quite often our public comments are 3 minutes, sometimes 2, and they're often focused on concerns, questions, harsh criticisms, but this work is not easy. And the recognition to move forward in a direction that acknowledges the many challenges you have, from facilities to the accommodations of all of our students, is much appreciated, not only as a constituent, but as a parent. And I'm gonna, because I am no longer a PTA leader, just say something I said quite often to our community, that when you're fighting for something that you care about, you can always find a way to bring the community with you. And I encourage you all to keep doing that. This process, I sat on May 3rd, 2019, when Mill Hill was reduced, and was frustrated to a point where I kicked my advocacy into a high gear. And to see this work, the data collection, the scenarios, the meetings, the conversations, all of that will be needed, not only for the State Board of Education, but for this community. You've done a tremendous job to educate on the needs of not only our population, but our buildings. So I thank you for all that work, and I think it will be tremendously used moving forward. Thank you.
Good evening, David Krasnoff, 155 Burr Street. First off, I want to thank Mr. Testani and Ms. Jacobson for doing the facilities. The usage is very important. Hopefully this becomes a living document that we use yearly and refer to for all long-term planning to ensure proper usage of our classrooms for both our students and our teachers. Like Mr. Testani said, it is very, very important. I also want to make sure we don't lose focus on what Ms. Ratali said about the ECC. I find it extremely important, and we need to make sure we don't ignore that classroom space is needed. So please. On to redistricting. Very happy with what everyone finally came to the conclusion with today. I do wish it was done a little bit differently, like Ms. Gerber said. I think if we knew the facilities sooner, talking about 10 or 11 schools or some of the scenarios would not have put the stress on the community that it ended up doing. So I do feel that there was some unnecessary stress that I think the whole board should own. But I'm really glad with the solution, and I'm glad the work that was done that can now be brought to the state and show that we did the work and it just doesn't fit in our facilities. Finally, I do want to mention what Ms. Vitale said. Yes, I am a candidate running for Board of Ed. Yes, I would love to see all the options that Ms. Vitale asked for. I'm not saying that it's the right move, but I would, if I was on the board, I would like that work to be done for me so I knew if it was or was not the right move. I can speak for myself. I have a 1-year-old who I would put into an IB program. Thank you so much.
No one else? I'm going to make a motion that the special meeting of the Board of Education adjourned at not even 10 p.m. Wow, where are we going? Mrs. Ratali, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Back to the board. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the public. Thank you for the staff for being here, and have a good night.